At my father's funeral, a woman stood at the back, crying harder than anyone. No one recognized her. After the service, she left a single rose on his coffin with a note that read, "For what we lost and what we couldn't finish." When I asked my mother, she froze and whispered she shouldn't be here. She promised she'd stay away. Now I can't stop thinking, who was she? And what secret did my father die keeping? The rain had started before dawn. Not a storm, not the kind that crashes against windows with fury, but a steady, relentless drizzle. The kind that seeps into everything, that makes the world smell of wet earth and silence. The church stood at the edge of town, small and stone gray, its steeple reaching like a quiet plea into the clouds. People gathered under umbrellas, black coats blending into one long shadow as they moved toward the doors. Enjoying the story? Hit like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Elliot Parker stood near the entrance, fingers tightening around the folded program in his hands. James Parker, beloved husband, father, and friend. The words felt both too much and too little. His father had always been complicated, the kind of man who filled a room without ever seeming to be in it. Now looking around, Elliot realized just how many people his father had touched. Old neighbors, colleagues, distant cousins. Faces from every corner of his father's life had come. Yet none of them looked like they truly knew him. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lilies and rain-soaked wool. The wooden pews creaked as people sat. A low murmur of condolences floated between rows, hushed and polite. Elliot's mother, Margaret, sat near the front, still and composed, her gloved hands clasped together on her lap. She had that distant expression again, the one Elliot had seen too often since the diagnosis. Like she was there, but already fading somewhere he couldn't follow. When the organ began to play, the sound rolled through the space, deep, heavy, reverent. Elliot rose as the casket was brought in. His throat tightened. There it was, the finality of it. The polished wood, the gleam of brass handles, the quiet shuffling of pallbearers. He tried to look at it, to see his father there, but his eyes kept darting away. The service began. Words about legacy, kindness, and faith filled the air. Elliot listened, but it all felt like a story someone else had written. His father had been kind, yes, but he'd also been distant, secretive in ways that never quite made sense. There were entire parts of his life that seemed edited, stories that started but never ended, questions brushed off with a smile or a sudden change of subject. Elliot's mind drifted until the sound of quiet sobbing pulled him back. It wasn't the gentle weeping of grief that echoed softly through the church. It was sharper, broken, a sound that didn't belong to familiarity. He turned slightly, scanning the back rows. That's when he saw her. She stood alone, near the rear of the church, head bowed, hands trembling as she clutched a crumpled tissue. Her hair, dark, streaked with silver, fell loosely around her face. Even from a distance, Elliot could see the way her shoulders shook, how she seemed to be fighting something inside her. No one else seemed to recognize her. Eyes slid past her as though she wasn't there. When the service ended, people began to move. Quiet whispers, a few lingering hugs. Elliot stood beside his mother as they approached the coffin one last time. She placed a hand gently on the wood, her face unreadable. "Goodbye, James," she whispered. As they turned to leave, Elliot glanced back. The woman from the back had moved forward now, hesitant, her steps small but determined. When she reached the coffin, she didn't say a word. She laid a single white rose on top, its petals already dotted with raindrops. Then she slipped a folded note beneath it, a small square of paper, handwritten, delicate. Elliot watched her leave. No one stopped her. No one asked, who she was. She walked out into the rain without an umbrella, her dark coat melting into the gray. Outside, the air was colder. The funeral procession moved toward the cemetery at the edge of town. The earth was soft from the rain, and people's shoes sank slightly with each step. Elliot stood beside his mother as the casket was lowered, the sound of the ropes and the priest's voice blending into a dull rhythm. When it was over, people began to drift away, one by one. Elliot bent down to pick up the rose before it could be buried by the rain. The note beneath it was damp but still legible. He hesitated. It didn't feel like his to read, but curiosity pressed harder than guilt. The handwriting was careful, elegant, unmistakably intimate. For what we lost, and what we couldn't finish. He frowned, heart beating faster. The words didn't make sense, but they carried a weight, like something meant for a conversation long overdue. He turned to show his mother, but she wasn't beside him anymore. She stood a few feet away, talking to one of his father's old co-workers. At least, she had been. Now she stood frozen, eyes fixed on the rose in Elliot's hand. Her lips parted slightly. "Where did you get that?" Elliot hesitated. "She left it. The woman in the back, you saw her?" The color drained from her face. "She was here?" "Yes," Elliot said slowly. "Who was she?" For a moment, Margaret didn't answer. Then, barely above a whisper, "She shouldn't be here. She promised she'd stay away." Her voice trembled, and she turned abruptly, walking toward the car before he could say another word. The rain came harder now, masking the sound of her footsteps. Elliot stood there, the rose in one hand, the note in the other, and realized that something had just shifted. Something he didn't yet understand. That night the house was unbearably quiet. His mother went to bed early, claiming a headache. Elliot sat alone in the living room, staring at the folded note on the table. The clock ticked in the corner, each second louder than the last. He thought about calling someone, maybe his sister Anna, who lived a few hours away, but decided against it. She'd only say what she always did. "Let it go, Elle. Dad had his secrets. We all do. But this didn't feel like just a secret. It felt like a story that had been buried, and someone had come to mourn it." The next morning, Elliot found his mother in the kitchen, staring out the window with a cup of tea she hadn't touched. The light was gray, filtered through the same low-hanging clouds that had followed them home from the cemetery. "Mom," he said softly. "Who was she?" Margaret didn't look at him. "No one who matters anymore." "That's not true," Elliot pressed. "You said she promised to stay away. Why?" Finally she turned, her expression tightening. "Because your father made a choice, and so did she. Some things are better left where they belong. In the past." Her voice cracked slightly, but the wall went up just as quickly. She walked past him, leaving her tea untouched. Elliot watched her go, unease building in his chest. He knew his mother. Strong, composed, measured. But there was something different about the way she'd said it. Something that sounded like fear. That evening, he sat in his father's study, a room that had always been off limits when they were kids. The shelves were lined with old books, binders, papers stacked with careful precision. His father had always been private, almost obsessively so. Even after he got sick, he'd kept his office locked, saying he didn't want a mess made of what's left. But now, sitting there, surrounded by his scent, tobacco, paper, a hint of cedar, Elliot felt an ache of nostalgia, and something darker too. He opened the desk drawers one by one. Pens, notebooks, unpaid bills, the usual clutter. Then, in the back of the bottom drawer, he found a box. Small, wooden, unmarked. The kind of thing meant to be hidden, not lost. It wasn't locked. Inside, there were photographs. Old ones, faded with time. Most were of his father in his younger years, fishing trips, office parties, a vacation photo he vaguely remembered from childhood. But beneath them, a different set, smaller, worn at the edges, caught his eye. They were of a woman. The same woman from the funeral. In one, she stood beside his father near a lake, laughing, her hair blowing across her face. In another, they sat together on a park bench, her head resting on his shoulder. They looked happy. Intimately so. There was no mistaking it. Elliot's chest tightened. He stared at the photographs until his eyes burned, then flipped one over. On the back, in his father's handwriting, were 2 words, "For us." He sat there for a long time, listening to the rain against the window, trying to piece together what it meant. It wasn't just an affair. It felt like something deeper, something that had lasted, something that had ended unfinished. He picked up the rose again, now wilted slightly from the damp, and read the note once more. For what we lost, and what we couldn't finish. It was starting to sound less like a love note, and more like a confession. Later that night, when his mother came downstairs, she found him sitting there, the box open on the desk. She froze in the doorway. Her expression said everything before her mouth could. "Mom," Elliot said quietly. "Who was she?" Margaret's eyes glistened. For a moment, it looked like she might tell him, might finally release whatever had been pressing on her chest since that day at the church. But then, her face hardened. "Put those away," she said softly. "Please, Elliot. Just put them away." "I can't," he said. "You have to tell me. Did Dad love her?" Her hand trembled against the doorframe. "Yes," she whispered finally. "Once. But love isn't always what saves people. Sometimes, it's what ruins them." And then she left. Quietly. Deliberately. Before he could ask another question. Elliot sat there in the dim light, the sound of rain still whispering against the glass. For the first time in his life, he realized there were entire pieces of his father, of his family, that he'd never truly known. And now, with both of them gone, only one question remained. What had they lost? And what had they never finished? The next morning, the sky had cleared, but the light felt wrong. Too bright, too sharp. The kind of light that exposes more than it warms. Elliot woke to the sound of birds and the faint creak of floorboards from his mother's room. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying that image over and over again. His father, the unknown woman, the rose, the note. It all felt too deliberate to be a coincidence. He made coffee but couldn't drink it. The house was filled with the hollow quiet that follows loss. The kind that doesn't fade, only shifts shape. From the living room, he could still see the faint outline where the coffin had rested for the wake, the indent in the carpet that hadn't yet lifted. He stared at it for a long time, thinking of his father's voice, that calm, measured tone that always seemed to hide something just beneath the surface. "You don't need to know everything to understand someone," his father had once said. But now, that line felt like a warning rather than wisdom. When his mother came downstairs, she was dressed neatly, as if preparing for errands she hadn't mentioned. Her face was pale but composed. She poured herself coffee, added 1 spoon of sugar, exactly 1, always 1, and sat opposite him. Neither spoke for a while. The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. Finally, Elliot broke the silence. "I can't stop thinking about her." Margaret's eyes didn't meet his. "You shouldn't. She left that note, Mom. She was crying harder than anyone there. I think she loved him." Margaret's hands tightened around her mug. "Yes," she said finally. She did. The words landed like stones. Elliot felt a flicker of something. Not anger exactly, but betrayal on behalf of the woman who had raised him, the family he thought he knew. "Did you know?" he asked quietly. Her silence was answer enough. He leaned forward. "How long?" Margaret closed her eyes, the faintest tremor in her jaw. "Too long. Long enough for me to almost forgive him, but not long enough to forget." Her voice wasn't angry. It was sad, tired, like a story told too many times in her head. "Your father wasn't a bad man, Elliot, but he was weak in ways I could never fix. And she hesitated, swallowing hard. She was part of that weakness. Elliot wanted to ask more, but the look in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't just pain. It was fear. A quiet, persistent fear that had nothing to do with jealousy and everything to do with what she wasn't saying. After she left for her errands, he found himself drawn back to the box again. The photos, the note, the handwriting, they all pointed to something bigger. He turned one of the photos over again, the one by the lake. In the background was a sign, half obscured by sunlight. He squinted, reading the faded lettering, Harbor Point Lodge. He didn't recognize it, but a quick search online told him it was a small inn 3 hours north. Lakeside, quiet, still in operation. The photos on the website were nearly identical to the background in the old picture. Same dock, same pine trees bending over the water. Without thinking too much about it, he grabbed his keys. The drive north was long and mostly silent. The highway cut through miles of rolling fields and sparse woods, the kind of landscape that made you feel small, like time was something that stretched both behind and ahead without care for what you carried in between. As he drove, he thought about his father's laugh, the way it used to fill the house when Elliot was little, the way it had faded over the years into something quieter, almost rehearsed. Maybe he'd been living a half-life all that time, torn between what he had and what he'd lost. The thought made Elliot's chest tighten. By the time he reached Harbor Point, the afternoon light had begun to soften into gold. The lodge was smaller than it looked in pictures. Weathered, but charming, with ivy climbing the stone walls and a porch that creaked under his weight. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of cedar and old books. A woman in her 60s sat behind the front desk, glasses perched low on her nose, flipping through a ledger. She looked up with a polite smile. "Checking in?" "Not exactly," Elliot said. "I was wondering if you could help me with something. My father used to come here years ago. I think he might have stayed with someone. I'm trying to find out if there's any record of it." Her smile faded slightly. "What was his name?" "James Parker." She glanced down at the ledger, flipping through a few pages, then shook her head. "We only keep records for the past 10 years. Anything older than that gets archived. You might have to check the county storage if you're looking for something old." He nodded, disappointed, but not surprised. "I see. Thank you anyway." As he turned to leave, she hesitated. "Wait. Parker, you said?" "Yes." She frowned thoughtfully. "You know, I remember that name. Not from the books, but from before. There used to be a couple who came up every summer. Stayed in the same cabin, down by the lake. He looked a bit like you, actually. Tall, quiet. Always had a camera with him." Elliot's pulse quickened. "Do you remember the woman's name?" The woman thought for a moment. "Laura, I think." "Yes, Laura. She was lovely. Bit reserved, but they seemed close. It's been years, though. The last time I saw them was maybe 15, 16 years ago. Laura." The name hung in the air like a key. Did she live nearby? Elliot asked. The innkeeper shook her head. No idea. But she used to stop by even after he stopped coming. Once or twice a year, always alone. Just sat by the lake for a while, then left. Haven't seen her in ages. Elliot thanked her and stepped outside. The wind off the lake carried the faint scent of pine and rain. The water shimmered in the fading light, rippling softly against the wooden dock. He walked toward it, feeling the boards give slightly under his steps. He could almost imagine them there, his father and this woman, Laura, sitting side by side, sharing secrets that had never reached home. It was strange, feeling jealous of a ghost. As he reached the end of the dock, something caught his eye. A small carving in the wood, faint but visible beneath the weathering. He crouched down. The initials were there, side by side, J plus L. He stared at them for a long moment until his phone buzzed in his pocket, jolting him back. The screen showed an unfamiliar number. He hesitated before answering. Hello? A pause. Then a woman's voice, soft, older, uncertain. Is this Elliot Parker? His breath caught. Yes. Who is this? I'm sorry to call you out of the blue, the woman said quietly. My name is Laura. The name hit him like a physical thing. He turned slowly, scanning the empty lakeshore as though she might somehow be there. I think we should talk, she continued. It's about your father. Elliot swallowed hard. How did you get my number? Your father gave it to me years ago. He told me if anything ever happened to him, I should call. But only if I was sure he was gone. Her voice trembled slightly. I wasn't sure until the obituary. He said nothing for a long time. The wind rustled through the reeds, the dock creaking beneath him. Can we meet? She asked. He hesitated. Where? There's a diner off Route 6, near Millerton. Tomorrow at noon. I'll be in the back booth. Please come alone. The line clicked before he could answer. Elliot stood there for a long time after the call ended, staring out at the water that had once reflected his father's secrets. The sun dipped lower, staining the lake in muted gold. He pocketed his phone, the carved initials still etched behind his eyes, and drove back into town with a mind spinning too fast to settle. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. Not clearly, just flashes. A woman crying in a church, a rose against polished wood, a whisper between rain and silence. He didn't know what he wanted from her. The truth, maybe, or just a version of it that made sense. By the time morning came, the world felt quieter, as if waiting. The diner was one of those old roadside places that looked the same no matter where you went. Faded red booths, coffee that smelled stronger than it tasted, a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. The waitress smiled absently when he walked in, motioning toward the back. She was already there. Laura looked smaller up close, though not fragile. Time had traced fine lines around her eyes, but there was something steady about her presence. Something that felt both heavy and unshakable. She wore a simple gray coat, hands folded on the table. When she saw him, her expression softened with something like recognition. Elliot, she said quietly, as though saying his name brought back years of memory. You look like him. He sat across from her. You were at the funeral. She nodded. I shouldn't have gone, but I had to see him one last time, even if it wasn't really him anymore. There was no defensiveness in her tone, no apology that expected forgiveness, just honesty, raw and quiet. Elliot studied her face. How long did you know him? Her eyes dropped to her hands. 27 years. He blinked. That's almost my whole life. I know. The silence stretched between them. She stirred her coffee, though she hadn't added anything to it. We met before you were born. He was doing contract work upstate. I was working at the county office. It started as friendship. We didn't mean for it to become more, but life doesn't always ask permission. Elliot's stomach turned. So he was with you while he was married to my mother? Laura met his eyes, calm but pained. Not at first. But yes, eventually. It wasn't just an affair, Elliot. It was a life we could never fully have. He loved your mother. But he loved me too. And that's the truth I've had to live with. Being the half of someone's heart that could never come home. He didn't know what to say. The anger he'd expected wasn't there. Only confusion, sorrow, and a strange, reluctant empathy. He told me about you, she said softly. Both of you. He was proud. He always said you were too much like him, and that worried him. Why? Elliot asked. Her lips trembled slightly. Because he thought you'd go looking for answers you might not survive knowing. The words sank deep, heavy as stones. What does that mean? Laura hesitated, glancing toward the window. Your father made mistakes, Elliot. Not just with me, but with people. The kind that leave scars you can't see. He spent the last decade trying to fix something he couldn't undo. She reached into her bag and slid an envelope across the table. He told me to give you this if he ever died before we spoke again. Elliot stared at it, his name written in his father's familiar handwriting. The envelope was thick, sealed carefully, like it held something fragile. What's in it? He asked. I don't know, she said. He mailed it to me 2 years ago. I never opened it. Said it wasn't for me. He ran his thumb over the flap but didn't open it. Why now? Why not tell me sooner? Because he made me promise, Laura said. And I owed him that much. She stood then, leaving money on the table for her coffee. There's more you'll need to know, but not from me. Read the letter. Then, if you still want the truth, meet me again. Same place, 3 days from now. She gave him a small, almost sorrowful smile and walked out before he could stop her. Elliot sat there for a long time, the envelope heavy in his hands, his father's name echoing in the air between them. A name that now felt more like a question than a person. The letter sat untouched on the kitchen table for hours. Elliot couldn't bring himself to open it. The paper felt heavier than it should have, as if the weight inside wasn't ink, but memory. Outside, the evening had settled into a cool hush. The light through the windows painted soft, amber stripes across the floor. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then stopped. His mother was upstairs. The sound of her footsteps had been absent since she returned from town. He imagined her sitting in her room with the door closed, that same silence wrapped around her like armor. He wondered if she knew about the letter, if she'd been waiting, dreading, expecting it. Finally, as the clock ticked past 9, he sat down and broke the seal. Inside was a folded stack of pages, written in his father's familiar, deliberate handwriting, each line steady, like he'd taken his time choosing the words. Elliot took a deep breath and began to read. Elliot, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you in person. I wanted to, more times than I can count, but every time I tried, the words felt too heavy to speak. There's something about seeing your child's eyes that makes truth harder to bear. You see, son, I've spent half my life building things, fixing things, but this I could never repair. Before I met your mother, I was someone else. I don't mean that in the poetic sense. I mean it literally. I had another name, another town, another life. What your mother knew as the start of our family was really the second chapter of mine. Elliot's pulse quickened. His fingers trembled slightly. He turned the page. When I was 26, I lived in a town called Ashmere, 2 states north. I worked at a small contracting firm and rented a 1-bedroom above a hardware store. That's where I met her, Laura. She was the daughter of the man who owned the building. She had this way of listening that made you forget the world was bigger than the room you were in. We married young, foolishly maybe, but we meant it. We meant every word. Elliot froze. Married. His breath hitched as he reread the line. 2 years later, we had a child. A boy. His name was Samuel. He had her eyes. My temper. He used to sit on my shoulders and laugh so hard I'd forget every bad thing that ever happened. He was everything I thought my life would ever need to be. But that's the thing about life, Elliot. It doesn't ask what you're ready to lose. It was winter. The house we lived in was old, and the wiring hadn't been updated since the 60s. I was working late one night when the fire started. They said it began in the living room. Faulty wire, they told me. Laura made it out. Sam didn't. I found her in the street, barefoot in the snow, screaming his name. I can still hear it. Elliot's throat tightened. He stopped reading, staring blankly at the page, his father's handwriting beginning to blur. He swallowed hard and forced himself to continue. After that, there was no saving her. Or me. We tried to rebuild. But every corner of that house smelled like ash, and every sunrise felt like something stolen. I stayed until I couldn't anymore. I told her I needed to leave, that maybe space would help. She begged me not to go, and I promised I'd come back. But I never did. I left Ashmere, changed my name, and tried to start over. I met your mother a few years later. She was everything I wasn't. Steady, kind, practical. She gave me a life again. But even then, part of me stayed in that burning house. Laura and I were never divorced. We just became ghosts in each other's stories. Elliot's hands shook as he turned the next page. The paper crackled like brittle leaves. When you were born, I thought maybe I could finally let go. And for a while I did. But time doesn't bury the past, Elliot. It just hides it under layers of good intentions. I saw Laura again about 15 years ago. She'd moved to a small town by the lake. Said she couldn't stand the city anymore. We met once a year, quietly, just to make sure we were both still standing. She never remarried. I think part of her believed I'd come back for good one day. I never told your mother. I justified it by saying it was mercy, that some truths only destroy. But now, looking back, I think it was cowardice. The kind you spend a lifetime dressing up as protection. There's one more thing you need to know. About a year before I died, Laura told me something I didn't believe at first. She said she'd found out that Sam might not have died that night. That one of the neighbors had seen a man carry a child out through the back before the flames took the roof. Body they buried might not have been him. I didn't believe her, Elliot. I couldn't. But then she showed me something. A letter she received from an adoption agency dated the following spring, with Sam's name on it. I tried to track it down, but the records were sealed. I didn't have much time left, and I didn't want to drag you into something that might break you. But if you're reading this now and you can bear it, find her. Find Laura. Find out if my son, your brother, is still out there. And if he is, tell him I'm sorry. Dad. Elliot sat there for a long time, unable to move. The air felt too thin. The sound of his own breathing filled the room like static. A brother. A whole other life. He read the letter again, slower this time, catching the weight behind every sentence. It wasn't just about love or loss. It was about guilt, the kind that carves a man hollow. When he finally looked up, the window reflected his face. Pale, drawn, unfamiliar. He saw traces of his father there, and for the first time, he wasn't sure if that was something to be proud of or afraid of. Upstairs, he heard the faint sound of a floorboard creak. His mother was awake. He folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and climbed the stairs. Her door was slightly ajar. The lamp was still on, and she was sitting on the edge of the bed staring at something in her hands. A photograph, small and creased. "Mom?" She looked up sharply, eyes red. "You read it, didn't you?" He nodded. "You knew." Her lips pressed together. Not everything, but enough. He stepped inside. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Margaret sighed, setting the photo down. "Because your father begged me not to. Because he said it was his cross to carry, not yours. And because I loved him enough to believe that burying the past would save us." Her voice cracked then, and she looked up at him, her face raw with exhaustion. "But I saw what it did to him, Elliot. Every time he looked at you, he saw the son he'd lost, and the life he couldn't undo. I think that's why he worked so much, why he stayed away. Guilt has a way of keeping people busy." Elliot sat beside her. The silence between them was heavy, but not empty. It was filled with all the things neither had said, the questions, the grief, the years spent pretending that normal was enough. After a long moment, he said quietly, "He wants me to find them. Laura." The boy. Margaret's eyes closed. "I was afraid you'd say that. He could still be alive, Mom. And what if he's not?" she whispered. "What if all you find are ghosts? Then at least I'll know which ones are real." She didn't answer, just reached out and touched his hand, a small gesture, but one that said everything a mother could when words weren't enough. The next morning, Elliot packed a small bag. He didn't tell his mother where he was going, only that he needed to see someone. She didn't ask. Maybe because she already knew. The road to Millerton felt short at this time, the way roads always do when you know where they lead. The diner looked exactly as it had. Same flickering neon sign, same worn booths. But Laura wasn't there yet. He ordered coffee and waited, staring out the window as rain began to fall again, soft and persistent. When she finally arrived, she looked different, more fragile somehow, like she'd been carrying the same sleepless weight he had. She sat across from him, without speaking for a while. "You read it," she said quietly. He nodded. "Was any of it true?" "All of it." "Then why didn't you tell me about the fire? About Sam?" Laura's eyes welled with tears she didn't bother to hide. "Because I didn't know for sure until years later. I thought he was gone. I saw the fire, Elliot. I saw what was left of the house. But then a man, a social worker, came to see me months later. Said there'd been a mix-up. That a boy matching Sam's description had been brought to a hospital in another county that night. Badly burned. No identification. They placed him in temporary care. But by the time I found the file, it had been sealed." "Why would they do that?" She shook her head. "Because someone wanted it that way. I think your father tried to find out, but he didn't have the strength to open that door again." Elliot pulled the letter from his bag, laying it between them. "He wanted me to keep looking." Laura's hand brushed over the envelope. "Then we start together." He met her eyes, the eyes that had once been his father's refuge. And for the first time, he didn't see her as the woman who'd broken their family. He saw her as someone who'd been broken too. Outside, the rain grew heavier, streaking the windows until the world beyond blurred into shades of gray. Laura opened her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, an old photocopy of a document. "This is the adoption notice I showed your father. It's dated April 12th, 1987. The agency was called Ridgeview Placement Services. It closed years ago, but the building's still there, just outside Ashmere." Elliot stared at the paper. The name of the agency burned into his mind. "Then that's where we go." Laura hesitated. "You don't have to do this, Elliot. You could walk away. Let the dead rest." He looked at her, his father's letter still open on the table, the words echoing, "Find her. Find him. Tell him I'm sorry." "I can't," he said simply. "Not until I know." Laura nodded, as if she'd been waiting for that answer. "Then we'll go tomorrow." As they stood to leave, the waitress refilled their coffees, oblivious to the storm gathering just beneath the surface of their small, quiet world. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air was still, charged like the moment before thunder. Elliot looked at the horizon, where the road curved north toward Ashmere, toward the ashes of a life that wasn't quite finished. And for the first time, he felt it. Not grief, not fear, but the unmistakable pull of truth, waiting to be found. Under the dim light of a nearly empty hospital corridor, Claire sat on a cold bench outside her mother's room. The world felt muffled, machines beeping faintly, the steady hum of air conditioning, the low murmur of nurses exchanging shift notes. Her mother, Margaret, had been admitted 2 nights earlier after collapsing in the kitchen. The doctor said it was her heart, strained, tired, much like the rest of her. But it wasn't just her mother's health that weighed on Claire. It was everything that had unraveled since her father's funeral. The mysterious woman, the letters, the truth that refused to stay buried. She pressed her palms together, the rough paper of the last note between them. "You were never meant to know. Some love stories are curses disguised as memories." The handwriting was her father's. She'd found it inside the cottage in the woods, tucked behind a framed photograph of her parents from their early days, a photo she now knew wasn't the whole truth. Because standing just at the edge of that same photograph, blurred, barely visible, was the woman from the funeral. A nurse walked by and smiled softly, mistaking her silence for worry. Claire nodded back faintly, but her thoughts were miles away, back in that little lakeside cottage where the air had smelled of dust and regret. She could still hear the echo of her father's voice on the old cassette tape she'd found there. "If you're hearing this, then I broke my promise." He'd sounded older than she remembered, as if life had been pulling him apart piece by piece. "Her name is Evelyn. You were never supposed to meet her. Your mother and I agreed to that. But she was part of me before any of this. Before you. Before I tried to become the man I thought I should be." Claire had replayed the tape again and again, searching for clues in every hesitation, every tremor in his breath. But it was what came next that shattered her completely. "Evelyn and I lost something together. Someone. Your brother." That single word, brother, hung in her chest like a ghost, refusing to move on. The door opened behind her, and Margaret's frail voice broke the silence. "Claire, come in." Her mother looked smaller than she ever had, the hospital gown draping loosely over her shoulders. The oxygen tube framed her face, but her eyes, pale, distant, haunted, were sharp with something that wasn't sickness. It was fear. Claire sat beside her. "You knew about her. Evelyn." Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, as if summoning the strength to face a truth she'd buried long ago. "I asked her to stay away. I begged her." "Why? Who was she to Dad?" And what did he mean about a brother? Margaret turned her face toward the window where dawn was breaking, thin, silvery light touching the edge of the curtains. Before you were born, she began slowly, your father was engaged to her. They were young, wild, convinced they could take on the world together. Then she got pregnant. It was complicated. Claire's throat tightened. Complicated how? She lost the baby. At least that's what everyone believed. Margaret's voice cracked, but it wasn't true. She had the child. She just couldn't raise him. Not then. Not after what happened between them. Claire's pulse quickened. What happened? Your father found out too late. He went after her, tried to bring the boy home, but Evelyn, she couldn't let go. They fought. There was an accident. He came back broken, never the same again. He married me because he needed a life that didn't remind him of her. Claire could barely breathe. So you knew. You knew I had a brother out there? Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Yes. But he was taken by her family. They moved him, changed names, cut ties. Your father promised he'd let it go, for my sake, for yours. But he never did. He wrote to her sometimes. I found the letters. I burned them all except one. Why? Claire whispered. Because loving someone like that doesn't just stop, Margaret said. It becomes a shadow that follows every step you take. The silence between them was heavy, and Claire felt the walls of the hospital room closing in. The air smelled of disinfectant and old grief. Her father's entire life, his choices, his love, his guilt, had been built on a secret that spanned decades. She stood abruptly, feeling the weight of her name, her bloodline, her identity unraveling. Where is he now? She asked. The boy? My brother? Margaret looked at her with trembling lips. He came to the funeral, Claire. Claire froze. What? He was there, with her. The woman who left the rose. That's why she cried like that. Not just for your father, but for the man she lost twice. Claire's hands shook. You saw him? I couldn't speak, Margaret said. I thought my heart would stop right there. I told her to stay away because I couldn't face it again. I couldn't face the reminder of everything I wasn't to your father. A sudden rush of nausea rose in Claire's chest. The stranger at the back of the funeral, tall, broad-shouldered, face half hidden behind dark sunglasses. She remembered catching his gaze for a fleeting second. There had been something familiar in his posture. The way he'd clenched his jaw. The way his hand lingered near the coffin, longer than anyone else's. She'd thought it was just grief. Now she knew better. That night, after leaving the hospital, Claire drove without direction. The rain came down in sheets, the windshield wipers fighting to keep pace. Every turn of the wheel felt guided by something outside of her, pulling her back toward the cemetery. When she arrived, the grounds were empty except for the sound of rain tapping on the polished marble stones. Her father's grave stood at the far edge, beneath a weeping willow that bowed low against the wind. A single rose lay on the headstone, fresh, its petals trembling with raindrops. Beneath it, another note. You deserve the truth. I wish we could have met differently. E. Her breath caught in her throat. E? Evelyn? Or him? Then she heard footsteps behind her, soft, deliberate, and hesitant. She turned. A man stood a few paces away, his coat soaked, his expression unreadable in the half-light. I didn't mean to scare you, he said quietly. His voice was low, careful, familiar, in a way that made her stomach twist. Were you at the funeral? She asked. He nodded. I didn't know how else to say goodbye. Who are you? Claire whispered, though part of her already knew. He took a step forward. My name is Adam. The name hit her like a memory she'd never lived. The wind howled through the trees as she stared at him, his eyes the same color as hers, his mouth trembling with a sorrow that felt like it had always belonged to her too. "I think," she stammered, "I think you're—" He nodded before she could finish. "I know. I found out a few months before he died. He reached out. We were supposed to meet. But then," his voice broke. "He never got the chance." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "He kept you a secret all my life." "And me from his," Adam said softly. "He wanted to tell you. But your mother asked him not to. He said he couldn't hurt you like that." "He hurt all of us anyway," she whispered. They stood there, side by side, under the tree that bent, like it was listening. The rain softened into a drizzle. For the first time, Claire felt the air clear, not of pain, but of lies. The truth had left scars, yes, but it had also left them standing together, breathing in the same storm. Adam reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "He wrote this for you. He made me promise I'd give it to you one day." Claire opened it carefully. Her father's handwriting sprawled across the page. "My life was a mosaic of choices I made to protect you, and mistakes I made to protect myself. I loved you both, in different ways, in different worlds. If love were simple, I might have lived an honest life. But love is never honest, Claire. It's only human." She folded the note, pressing it to her heart. The rain fell harder again, but she didn't move. Neither did he. They stood together in the quiet grief of things finally understood. Weeks later, at the cottage, Claire found Evelyn's last letter hidden in a drawer beside the old typewriter. "He was never mine to keep, nor yours to lose. But he loved us both, and that should be enough to forgive him. If you ever meet Adam, tell him I'm sorry for the years I stole. Tell him his father never stopped looking at the horizon, waiting for him to come home." The ink had smudged at the edges as if written through tears. Claire placed it beside her father's tape, the rose now dried, its petals fragile but intact. For the first time, she felt no anger, only a quiet understanding that love, however flawed, had been the thread connecting all of them through time, guilt, and silence. Outside, the lake shimmered under the late autumn sun. The water carried reflections of things once hidden. Faces, memories, promises left unfinished. Claire watched her brother's silhouette approach from the dirt road, a hesitant wave in his hand. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel alone. The past had been a labyrinth of secrets, but somewhere in its center, she'd found what her father couldn't: peace. What do we truly owe to the secrets of those who came before us? When love is born from betrayal, does the truth heal, or does it simply change the shape of the wound? In the end, are we bound more by the blood we share, or by the forgiveness we choose to give? And if every hidden truth eventually surfaces, what would you want to be remembered for? The lies you kept, or the love you couldn't? When I moved into my new place, the landlord gave me 2 keys. One was for my door, the other was just a spare. Last night, I came home to find my fridge open and my laundry done. Nothing stolen, just rearranged. I checked my camera. Someone entered using my key. When I told the landlord, he sighed and said, "So, she's back again?" The new apartment smelled faintly of varnish and something older underneath. The kind of musty sweetness that seemed baked into the walls from decades of other lives. Emma tried to convince herself it was just old building charm. She'd said those exact words to the landlord when he handed her the keys 2 weeks ago, smiling through that slightly forced politeness people used when they weren't quite sure about something but didn't want to look paranoid. He'd been kind, though. A quiet man in his 60s with skin like crumpled paper. and eyes that rarely met hers for more than a second. 2 keys, he'd said, placing them in her palm. 1 for the door. The other's just a spare. Keep it safe. She'd asked, a spare for what exactly? He hesitated just long enough for her to notice, then smiled. You'll see. Old buildings have quirks. You'll be fine. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it. Moving was chaos. Boxes, dust, the endless shuffling of furniture up narrow stairs that smelled of detergent and rain-soaked carpet. The building itself, a 4-story brick structure on a quiet street just off the city center, had charm. Big bay windows, high ceilings, the faint hum of the city drifting through the glass at night like a heartbeat. For the first week, Emma settled in with a sense of tentative relief. She liked the sound of her own footsteps echoing in the hallway, the way her kettle hissed in the silence, the slow rhythm of living alone again. After her breakup with Daniel, she'd promised herself a reset, a quiet space, a fresh start. But that was before the first night she noticed something odd. It started small. The fridge door left slightly ajar one morning. She'd scolded herself for forgetting. Then came the misplaced mug, the laundry detergent cap unscrewed, a faint scent of lavender in the air, though she hadn't used any. Little things. Easy to explain. Until the night she came home late from work, a long day, rain-soaked coat clinging to her, the city already asleep. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and froze. The fridge was open, wide, the light inside casting a sterile glow across the dark kitchen floor. Her laundry, which she distinctly remembered leaving in a pile that morning, was neatly folded on the counter. Socks matched. Shirts ironed. Her heart thudded once, hard. She checked every room, pulse hammering. The apartment was empty. No signs of a break-in. Nothing stolen, just rearranged. It was almost considerate, and that was what made it worse. Emma sat on the edge of her couch for an hour that night, staring at the keys on the table. 2 of them. Identical silver ovals with the same faint etching on the edge. One she knew, one she didn't. When she finally gathered the nerve to check her small camera, a motion sensor she'd bought online for peace of mind, her hands shook. She played back the footage from that day, heart in her throat. At 2:43 p.m., while she was at work, the lock turned. The door opened. A woman stepped inside. The footage was grainy, black and white. She couldn't make out much. Medium height, hair tied back, wearing what looked like a pale cardigan. The woman moved calmly, like she belonged there. Straight to the kitchen. Checked the fridge, then the laundry area. Her movements were smooth, familiar. At one point, she turned toward the camera. Emma's breath caught. The woman smiled, faintly, almost affectionately, before walking out of frame. That night, Emma didn't sleep. She waited until morning to confront the landlord. He listened quietly, nodding, hands folded behind his back. When she finished, showing him the footage on her phone, he didn't seem surprised. He just sighed. So, he said softly, she's back again. The words dropped between them like stones in still water. Emma blinked. I'm sorry. What do you mean? She's back again? He rubbed his temples. You weren't supposed to have to deal with that. She usually keeps to herself these days. What? You knew someone had another key to my apartment? The landlord's face pinched with something like guilt. It's not quite like that. She used to live here. For a long time. Before you. Sometimes she comes back. Old habits, I suppose. Emma felt heat rising behind her eyes. You're telling me someone who used to live here still has access? And you didn't think to mention that before renting it out? He gave a weary shrug. I thought she'd moved on. She was harmless then. Maybe she still is. Harmless? Emma's voice broke on the word. She came into my home. She folded my clothes. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket, took out a worn notebook, and flipped through it. I'll change the locks for you, he said quietly. This evening. But don't antagonize her if you see her. She's been through a lot. Emma stared at him, incredulous. You know who she is. He nodded once. I do. Then call the police. He closed the notebook with a soft snap. That would only make things worse. She wanted to scream. But something in his tone, low, defeated, the kind of voice that came from someone who'd already tried and failed, made her stop. Instead, she just whispered, Why does she have a key? He hesitated, looking at her door. Because she never gave it back. That night, Emma sat by the window long after the lock had been changed, listening to the hum of traffic in the distance. She told herself it was over. The landlord had done his job. No one could get in now. But as the hours passed, a restlessness crept through her chest, the kind that made every sound feel sharper, every shadow deeper. At 3:12 a.m., a soft sound woke her. The doorknob turned, just once. A quiet click, like someone testing it. She held her breath. Then silence. In the morning, she checked the camera. Nothing. No motion detected. But the knob bore a faint smudge, as if someone's fingers had lingered there. The next day, she changed her routine. She double-locked. She left lights on. She even taped a small thread of paper across the doorframe. An old trick her father had taught her, to see if it would tear. That evening, she came home to find the paper gone. Her chest constricted. She ran inside. Everything looked the same until she noticed the photo on the mantelpiece, a picture of her and her sister laughing in the sun. It had been turned face down. That was the first time Emma called the police. They arrived quickly, 2 officers, polite but distracted. They checked for forced entry. None. They examined the locks. Perfectly intact. They took her statement, wrote something down, and left her with a brochure about personal safety awareness. Maybe you left the door unlocked, one of them said on the way out. Maybe. Except she hadn't. That night, Emma pushed the couch against the door. She slept with the lights on, her phone recording audio by the bedside. The next morning, she found the couch moved slightly back, just a few inches. But enough. Enough to make her hands tremble as she texted her sister, "Can I stay with you for a few days?" Her sister, Claire, replied within seconds, "Of course. What's wrong?" Emma hesitated before typing. "It's just something weird at the apartment. I think someone's coming in." Claire called immediately. "What do you mean someone's coming in?" Emma explained everything. The open fridge, the laundry, the landlord's strange reaction. Claire listened silently, then said, "Em, you can't stay there. That's insane. Pack a bag and come here tonight." Emma wanted to, but part of her resisted. It was the principle of it, her home, her space, her life. After months of rebuilding from her breakup, she'd finally found something that felt hers again. And now someone was trying to take that away. No. She'd stay one more night. She wanted proof. That evening, she set up her camera again, this time in multiple rooms. One in the kitchen, one facing the door, one in the hallway near her bedroom. She tested each angle twice, checked the battery, made sure the timestamp was visible. She went to bed around midnight, the faint whir of the camera, like a lullaby she didn't quite trust. At 3:47 a.m., the door opened. The woman entered again. Only this time, she didn't go to the kitchen. She walked straight to Emma's bedroom. The camera caught her pausing at the doorway, head tilted, watching the sleeping figure on the bed. Then she moved closer. Her hand hovered above Emma's blanket for a moment, then lowered gently, smoothing the fabric, almost tenderly. She whispered something the camera didn't quite pick up, then turned and left. When Emma watched the footage the next morning, her stomach turned to ice. The woman wasn't just visiting. She was checking in, like someone who still thought she lived there. Morning light seeped through the blinds in thin, trembling lines, striping the walls in pale gold and gray. Emma sat on the couch, still wearing the clothes she'd slept in, staring at the paused frame on her laptop. The woman's face was frozen mid-turn, her expression oddly peaceful, eyes soft as though she were looking at someone she loved. Emma couldn't breathe properly. It wasn't just the fact that the woman had been in her bedroom. It was how familiar her movements seemed, like muscle memory, guiding her through a space she used to know by heart. She played the footage again, slow motion. The figure moved with eerie precision, barely making a sound. When she brushed the blanket, her mouth formed words. Emma turned up the volume until static hissed through the speakers. A whisper threaded through it, barely audible. Home. Emma recoiled. She slammed the laptop shut, hands trembling. For several minutes, she just sat there, heart hammering against her ribs. Then she grabbed her phone and called the landlord. He didn't answer. She called again. Voicemail. Mr. Harlan, it's Emma. Please call me back. It happened again. She was here, in my room this time. I have footage. You need to tell me who she is. She hung up, paced the room, checked the locks again. The new bolts gleamed under her shaking hands. There was no sign of forced entry, no spare key on her ring. But somehow the door had opened all the same. Her mind kept circling back to his words. She's back again. Back. Which meant she'd gone before. Emma didn't want to admit it, but curiosity started creeping in around the fear. Who was this woman who moved through her home like it was still hers? What had driven her away? And why did she keep returning? By afternoon, she couldn't sit still anymore. She dressed, pulled her hair into a messy bun, and headed downstairs to Harlan's office. The landlord lived in the basement unit, the door marked with a crooked metal number and a fading private sign. She hesitated before knocking. Inside, she could hear faint classical music playing, strings and piano, soothing but melancholy. The door opened a crack. Harlan looked older in daylight. His eyes were red-rimmed, his expression guarded. Emma, he said, almost weary. I figured you'd come by. You saw my message? He nodded. I did. She took a step forward. Then, tell me who she is. He exhaled, moving aside to let her in. The air smelled of dust and pipe tobacco. His apartment was smaller than hers, crowded with books, tools, and the faint hum of a dehumidifier in the corner. He motioned to a chair, then sat across from her, elbows on his knees. Her name was Islina. Was? She used to live in your apartment for almost 8 years. Emma's fingers tightened on the armrest. And you let her keep a key all this time? She wouldn't give it back. Then change the locks. I did. More than once. He rubbed his forehead. It doesn't matter. She always finds a way in. Sometimes through the fire escape. Sometimes through the basement. Once through the balcony of the empty unit next door. Emma stared at him. And you just let her? What would you have me do? His voice broke slightly. She's not dangerous. She's lost. When her husband died, she started treating the place like a shrine. She'd come back when no one was home, clean things, rearrange them, like she was keeping his memory alive. That's insane, Emma said softly. Maybe, he admitted. But she's been through things most people couldn't handle. Her husband. He was one of mine too. Died right there in that apartment. Heart attack. She found him. Emma's stomach twisted. So she just comes back to relive it. Something like that. He reached for a worn photograph from the table and handed it to her. A younger woman smiling. Hair tied back, standing in front of what looked like the same bay window in Emma's living room. Lena. She used to plant flowers on the balcony every spring, Harlan said quietly. Tulips, mostly. Said they made her feel close to him. Emma stared at the picture. There was something gentle about Lena's smile. Something uncomfortably human. She wasn't the ghostly intruder Emma had built up in her head. Still, it didn't excuse what she was doing. Mr. Harlan, she said, setting the photo down carefully, I understand you feel sorry for her, but I can't live like this. You need to stop her. If you won't, I will. He nodded, eyes downcast. I'll speak to her. She listens to me sometimes. But Emma, don't confront her yourself. Promise me that. Emma didn't answer. When she returned upstairs, the light in the hallway flickered. The motion sensor buzzed faintly. Her door looked the same as always, but something about it felt different. Like the air around it had thickened. Inside, everything was exactly as she left it. Except for the tulip. A single red tulip lay on the counter, stem resting neatly across her folded dish towel. Emma's breath caught. She backed away, eyes darting toward the window. It was locked. She checked the footage. Nothing. No one had entered. Yet the flower sat there, fresh and dewy, as though it had just been picked. She stared at it for a long time, trying to decide what was worse, the possibility that Lena had somehow bypassed every lock and camera again, or that Emma herself was beginning to lose track of reality. That night, she took sleeping pills, desperate for rest. When she woke, the tulip was gone. In its place was a note, written in looping, graceful handwriting. I'm glad you're keeping it warm. Her heart stopped. She read it again, then again. The words were gentle, not threatening, but something about their calmness made her stomach lurch. She tore the note in half, then into smaller and smaller pieces until it was nothing but paper dust in her trembling hands. That evening, she packed a small bag. She couldn't stay another night. Not until she knew what was happening. Before leaving, she walked through the apartment one last time. She noticed small things she hadn't before. A faint scrape on the floor near the couch, a smudge near the window latch, and on the edge of the counter, a faint circle where a vase might once have sat. Emma thought of the photo of Lena by the window, the flowers, the soft way she touched the blanket. She'd been here, yes, but not as a stranger. Almost as if she were trying to reclaim something that had been taken from her. Emma hesitated at the door, keys in hand. Then she made a decision she couldn't quite explain. Instead of leaving for her sister's, she went to the city archives the next morning. She wanted to know what had happened in her apartment. It took hours, digging through old tenancy records, incident reports, and public obituaries. The clerk, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, looked mildly annoyed but curious enough to help. Finally, he found a file from 8 years ago. Lena Howard, he said, scanning it. Lived at that address for quite some time. Husband's name was Michael. Died at home. Heart failure. Emma swallowed. Anything else? He frowned. There's a follow-up report, though not police. Filed by a neighbor. Something about disturbances. Late night shouting, a woman crying on the balcony. The case was closed. Mental health related. Did she live there alone afterward? For a while, yes. He closed the file. Then the landlord reported her missing. About 6 months after the husband's death. Missing? He nodded. Never found. Officially, at least. Emma left the building with her heart pounding so hard it hurt. If Lena had been missing for years, who was the woman on her camera? That night, back in the apartment, she couldn't sit still. The tulip, the note, the soft whisper on the recording. It all swirled in her head until the air itself seemed to hum. She poured herself a glass of wine, trying to steady her hands. Outside, the streetlights flickered. A car passed, its headlights flashing across the window. Then faintly, she heard it. A soft humming. A woman's voice, coming from the other side of the wall. Emma froze, listening. The melody was low, mournful, familiar. The same tune her mother used to hum when Emma couldn't sleep. She pressed her ear to the plaster. The voice grew clearer. Come home soon. Emma stumbled back. She checked the clock. 2:10 a.m. With trembling fingers, she grabbed her phone and started recording audio again. The humming continued, steady, unhurried. Then came a faint creak, like a floorboard giving under someone's weight. And then, silence. Emma crept to the door, her body tense, and peered through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but on the floor outside her door lay another tulip. She didn't open the door. She just stared at it, her breath fogging the glass. The next morning she found footprints, bare, faintly outlined in dust, leading from the window to the hallway. That was the breaking point. She packed everything she could into 2 suitcases and called Claire. I'm leaving today, she said, voice trembling. Can you pick me up? Claire didn't hesitate. I'm on my way. When her sister arrived that afternoon, Emma felt relief flood through her. But as they loaded the bags into the car, Claire paused, glancing up at the window. Who's that? She asked. Emma turned. There behind the glass stood a woman, hair tied back, pale cardigan, watching them leave. Emma's breath hitched. Claire blinked. She looks like you. Emma's head snapped toward her. What? But when she looked again, the window was empty. The drive to Claire's place was quiet except for the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers. Rain fell in thin, steady sheets, smearing the city lights into streaks of gold and red across the glass. Emma kept her eyes on the road ahead, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Claire sat in the passenger seat, arms folded, watching her sister with worried eyes. You haven't said a word since we left, Claire finally said. Are you going to tell me who that woman was? Emma's jaw flexed. I don't know. Claire frowned. She looked like you. Emma shook her head, trying to push the image away. The camera showed her. She's real. She's not. She stopped herself. The word ghost hovered in the air between them, unspoken, but heavy. Claire sighed and leaned back. You should have left that place weeks ago. I couldn't. Why not? Because it felt like giving in? Emma thought. Because every time she tried to leave, it was like the apartment itself was holding on to her. The way Lena touched her blanket. The way the tulips appeared. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Personal. They reached Claire's house. A small 2-story on the edge of the city, surrounded by wet pines and the faint scent of soil after rain. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the smell of coffee and candles. Emma dropped her bags by the door and sank onto the couch. The exhaustion hit all at once. Claire poured her a mug of coffee and sat beside her. You can stay as long as you need. I mean it. Emma nodded weakly. Thanks. But that night, She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the woman in the window, the tilt of her head, the softness in her smile. And underneath that image, another thought pressed against her mind, quiet but insistent. She looked like you. She got up, pacing the room in the dark. The rain had stopped, but the silence outside felt heavier somehow. She opened her laptop, replayed the footage from the night before she left. The woman's face, Lena's face, was half in shadow. But there was something about the outline of her nose, her eyes, her chin. Emma's stomach dropped. It wasn't that Lena looked exactly like her. It was subtler, a resemblance that shouldn't exist. A mirror image softened by time, as if someone had painted Emma 20 years older and slightly sadder. She watched it again, zoomed in, heart racing. The longer she stared, the more impossible it seemed. She slammed the laptop shut. In the darkness of the guest room, she whispered to herself, "You're losing it." But the next morning, something strange happened. Claire was making breakfast when she asked, casually, "Did you go out last night?" Emma frowned. "No." "Why?" "Because the door was unlocked this morning. I could have sworn I locked it before bed." A chill ran through Emma's body. "You did. I checked." They exchanged a glance. Neither of them said it, but both thought the same thing. Later, Claire tried to reassure her. "It's an old lock. Probably didn't catch all the way." Emma nodded, pretending to believe it. But when she went to her room, she found something waiting on the pillow. A single tulip, fresh, red, dew still clinging to the petals. Her knees almost gave out. She grabbed the flower, threw it into the trash, and went straight to her car. By noon, she was parked outside Harlan's building again. When he opened the door, his expression was a mix of surprise and dread. "Emma, you shouldn't be here." "She followed me," Emma said flatly. "To my sister's house. You need to tell me what's going on." Harlan looked past her, as if checking whether someone had come with her. "You need to let this go." "Let it go?" Her voice cracked. "She broke into my apartment. Into my sister's house now. You think I can just let that go?" He closed the door halfway, lowering his voice. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." "Then explain it to me." He hesitated, then opened the door wider. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of damp wood. Harlan walked to a small desk and pulled open a drawer. From it, he took a folded newspaper clipping, yellowed at the edges. He handed it to her without speaking. The headline read, "Local woman presumed dead after suicide attempt. Body never recovered." Emma's throat went dry. The article described Lena Howard, grief-stricken widow, longtime resident of the building, who had vanished one night after leaving a note. The search had lasted weeks. No body was found. The police eventually concluded she had likely drowned in the river a few blocks away. Harlan spoke softly. "I didn't tell you before because I didn't think you'd believe me. But sometimes, after a new tenant moves in, things start to happen. Little things. The fridge open. Clothes folded. The tulips. Always the tulips." Emma stared at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you saying she's dead?" He rubbed his temples. "I don't know. Maybe she is. Maybe she isn't. Maybe some part of her never left that apartment." "But she's real," Emma said fiercely. "I have footage. She's on camera." Harlan nodded slowly. "So did the last tenant." Emma blinked. "What?" He opened another drawer and took out a USB drive, setting it on the table. "The couple who lived there before you. They installed cameras too. Same thing happened to them. They moved out after 3 weeks." Emma hesitated, then took the drive. I want to see it. He sighed. Emma, don't. The more you watch, the worse it gets. You start seeing her everywhere. But she was already at the door. That night, in a cheap motel near the river, Emma loaded the footage onto her laptop. The first few clips were almost identical to her own. An empty apartment, then movement. A figure entering quietly. Lena. Same cardigan, same calm steps. In one clip, the woman paused at the mirror in the hallway, touching the glass as if trying to remember her reflection. In another, she stood by the balcony, whispering something to the night. Emma leaned closer, adjusting the volume. The whisper was clearer this time. You'll see me when you're ready. Emma froze. She scrubbed backward, played it again. Same words, same voice. Then the next clip started. This time, Lena turned directly toward the camera. Her eyes, wide, unblinking, looked straight into the lens. And in the grainy darkness, her mouth moved in perfect sync with Emma's heartbeat. You shouldn't have taken my place. Emma slammed the laptop shut and shoved it off the bed. Her hands shook uncontrollably. She looked around the room, empty, still, ordinary. But in the mirror above the dresser, there was a smear of moisture. Like someone's breath had fogged the glass from the inside. She wiped it with her sleeve, heart pounding. The glass cleared, but for a brief second she thought she saw a reflection that wasn't hers. Same eyes, same shape, but older, sadder, watching. She stumbled back, knocking over a lamp. The crash echoed through the small room. She didn't sleep that night. By dawn, she'd made up her mind. If Lena had died near the river, that's where she'd find the truth. She drove there just after sunrise, the air cold and silver. The river ran dark and quiet beneath a thin layer of fog. On the bank stood an old metal railing, rusted and half swallowed by weeds. Emma leaned over it, staring at the water. Somewhere below, the current whispered against stone. She closed her eyes, whispering, "What do you want from me?" A voice behind her said, "She just wants to come home." Emma spun around. It was Harlan. He looked exhausted, eyes bloodshot. "I tried to stop her," he said quietly. "Every time someone new moves in, she comes back stronger. Maybe she doesn't even know she's gone. She's just trying to live the life she lost." Emma's chest tightened. "Then why me? Why does she look like me?" Harlan hesitated. "Because," he said finally, "you remind her of herself." He reached into his pocket and handed her a photograph. It was an old portrait of Lena and her husband, smiling in front of the same apartment window. But the man beside her, his eyes, his smile, looked hauntingly familiar. Emma's breath hitched. It was Daniel, her ex-boyfriend. Same face, same crooked grin. She looked up at Harlan, her voice breaking. "What the hell is this?" Harlan stepped back. "You didn't know?" "Know what?" "Daniel was her husband's nephew. He stayed with them when he was young. Spent summers there. That's how he met you, when he came back years later to help me rent the place." Emma's mind reeled. "Daniel showed me the apartment." Harlan nodded. "He said it was perfect for you. Said it felt like you belonged there." Her pulse pounded in her ears. "So this is some sick coincidence?" "Maybe not coincidence," Harlan said softly. "Maybe connection. Sometimes people carry pieces of others without knowing it. Maybe she saw him in you. Maybe she saw herself." Emma took a step back, shaking her head. No, this is insane." She turned toward the river, trying to steady her breathing. When she looked back, Harlan was gone. The path behind her was empty. Only the sound of the river remained, whispering softly, like a voice calling her name. The sky hung low and gray over the river. thick with the kind of silence that pressed on the skin like weight. Emma stood at the edge of the embankment long after Harlan vanished, her mind a blur of disbelief. The photo trembled in her hands. Daniel's face smiled up at her. Not her Daniel. Not exactly, but close enough that the air seemed to tilt around her. She tried to tell herself it was just a resemblance, a trick of memory, an accident of bone structure. But the details were too precise. The same faint scar on his jaw, the same half smile, the same restless energy in the eyes. The world felt suddenly thinner, like reality itself was wearing out at the seams. Emma stumbled back toward her car, clutching the photograph. Her fingers were cold and slick with rain. She drove without thinking, streets blurring into gray streaks until she found herself back at the building. She didn't remember deciding to go there, only the heavy pull of something unfinished, something that demanded she return. The building loomed ahead, its bricks darkened by rain. The front door creaked as she pushed it open, and the familiar scent of varnish and mildew met her like a memory she couldn't shake. Inside, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Her apartment door was unlocked. She froze. The new lock, the one Harlan had installed, hung twisted, metal scraped and warped. "Hello?" she called out, her voice barely audible. No answer. The air inside was cold. The lights flickered. Her breath came out in short, visible bursts. The tulip was back, sitting upright in the glass vase on the counter, stem perfectly straight, petals just beginning to open. Emma moved closer, drawn to it despite herself. The vase was filled halfway with water, fresh. Someone had just placed it there. And then she heard it. A faint rustle from the bedroom. Her throat tightened. She reached for her phone, hands shaking, and switched to the camera app. The lens trembled as she stepped forward, filming every cautious step. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. Through the crack, she could see a figure standing near the window. Shoulders slumped, head bowed. "Lena?" she whispered. The woman turned. For a moment, Emma thought she was looking into a mirror. The resemblance was unmistakable now. Older, yes, but undeniably her face. Her eyes, her expression. Lena smiled, soft and tired. "You came back." Emma's heart hammered. "What do you want from me?" Lena's voice was gentle, almost kind. "I want to go home." "You are home," Emma said, her voice trembling. "But it's not yours anymore. You have to leave." Lena stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the wood floor. "I never left," she murmured. "Not really. You just took my place." Emma backed away. "I didn't take anything. I just rented an apartment." Lena tilted her head, studying her. "He brought you here." Emma swallowed hard. "Who?" "Daniel," Lena said softly. "He said he found someone new, someone who reminded him of me. You moved into my space. You slept in my bed. You wore my life like it was yours." "That's not true," Emma whispered. "I didn't know. I didn't know any of this." Lena's eyes glistened. "I watched you try to make it yours. I watched you rearrange everything. But it always goes back, doesn't it? You feel it too." Emma shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "You're not real." Lena smiled faintly. "That's what I told myself too." A sudden noise broke the tension, a creak, footsteps behind her. Emma spun around, camera shaking. Harlan stood in the doorway, his face pale and wet with rain. "Emma," he said, voice hoarse, "put the phone down. Step away from her." Emma turned the camera toward Lena, but the woman was gone. The room was empty. She looked back at Harlan, breath ragged. "Did you see her?" He hesitated. His eyes darted to the window. "Emma, listen to me. You need to leave this place. Right now." She was here, Emma shouted. You saw her too, didn't you? Harlan shook his head. There's no one here. Her chest tightened. I filmed her. Look. She turned the phone screen toward him. The footage showed her walking into the bedroom, the window, the shadows. But no one else. No Lena. Just Emma, standing alone, talking to empty air. Her blood went cold. Harlan stepped closer, voice gentle. It happens to everyone who lives here too long. The longer you stay, the more the place remembers you. The place. He nodded. It's like it keeps echoes of people. The ones who left, the ones who never did. Sometimes it shows them to you. Sometimes it shows you to yourself. Emma stumbled back, shaking her head. No, she was real. She followed me. She left flowers. Harlan's eyes softened with pity. Lena used to leave flowers for her husband too. Maybe you picked up the habit without realizing. I didn't, she snapped. I didn't. She stopped. In her mind, flashes of memory broke through. Nights she couldn't remember clearly. Times she'd woken up to find things moved. The faint smell of detergent she'd dismissed as lingering scent. The paper she'd taped to the doorframe already torn before she left. Her own handwriting on the note she'd found. Her hand placing the tulip on the counter. Her voice humming softly in the night. The camera footage replayed in her head. The grainy black and white image of a woman entering her home. Medium height. Hair tied back. Pale cardigan. Her cardigan. The one she wore the day she moved in. Emma's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, breath shuddering. No, she whispered. No, it can't be. Harlan crouched beside her, eyes sad. Sometimes places hold on to us. The longer we live in them, the more we become part of their story. Lena never left. And now, he hesitated. Maybe neither did you. Emma looked up, confusion and dread twisting together. What are you talking about? He gestured toward the hallway mirror. Look, he said quietly. Emma turned. Her reflection stared back, pale, trembling, eyes wide. But behind her reflection, another figure stood. Older, softer, her same features worn by grief. Lena. Their gazes met. And then, slowly, Lena reached out, through the glass, and touched Emma's shoulder. The contact was ice cold and electric all at once, and the room seemed to blur around her. The walls shimmered, flickering between past and present. The apartment full of light and flowers one second, empty and decayed the next. She saw Lena laughing in the kitchen, her husband pouring coffee. Then a flash, him collapsing, Lena screaming, the sound muffled by years, then silence, then emptiness. And then Emma, unpacking her boxes, moving into a ghost's memory. The air thickened. The two women stood facing each other, reflections overlapping until they became one. Lena whispered, "Now you understand." Emma's voice was barely audible. "Understand what?" "That you were never replacing me," Lena said. "You were becoming me." The room went dark. When Emma opened her eyes, she was standing by the window. Morning light streamed in, soft and golden. The apartment smelled like coffee and tulips. She turned toward the counter. 2 cups sat there, steaming gently. She smiled faintly, as if she'd been waiting for someone. Outside, the city moved on. Weeks passed. The apartment was listed again. When a young couple came to view it, Harlan greeted them with his usual quiet smile. 2 keys, he said, handing them over. 1 for the door. The other's just a spare. They thanked him, not noticing the faint sound of humming from the unit above. And when they left, a single red tulip lay by the door. Fresh. Perfect. Waiting. What do we really leave behind in the spaces we call home? Our belongings? Our memories, or something deeper, something that continues to live long after we're gone? Was Emma haunted by Lena, or by her own unraveling identity within a place that remembered too much? When fear and loneliness begin to blur our sense of self, how do we know whether we're the intruder or the one who never truly left? While renovating my house, I found a diary wedged behind a wall panel. The last entry was dated exactly 1 week before I moved in. It described, in eerie detail, a person matching my name, my job, and my car. The final line said, "He doesn't know I'm watching yet." I thought it was a prank until I flipped the last page and saw a photo of me standing in the same room I was reading it in. The old house sat at the end of a narrow lane, quiet and half forgotten, as if time had once stopped there and never started again. Its facade was neither beautiful nor sinister, just worn, weathered, and patient. The kind of house that looked like it had seen families come and go. Laughter replaced by silence, years by dust. Ethan Clark stood in the front yard, his hands resting on the top of a crowbar, breathing hard. His jeans were streaked with paint and plaster dust. The early autumn air carried the faint sweetness of rot and rain-soaked leaves. Behind him, the faint hum of the town was distant. Cars passing, someone mowing a lawn, a dog barking down the street. But here, everything felt still. Too still. He'd bought the place 2 months earlier, cheap, half fallen apart, and aching for restoration. To him, it wasn't just a house. It was a project, a new start. After the divorce, after the career shift, he needed something to focus on, something to fix that wasn't himself. Inside, the living room was stripped to its bones. Wallpaper half peeled, floorboards groaning under each step, the scent of old wood mingling with something faintly metallic. He'd spent the last 3 days tearing down drywall, uncovering what decades had hidden. There was satisfaction in it. The slow reveal, the cracking and crumbling, the sight of something raw beneath the surface. By late afternoon, light slanted through the uncovered window in dusty ribbons. Ethan paused, resting against the ladder, watching particles float lazily in the air. He wiped his forehead with the back of his arm and smiled faintly. "Getting there," he murmured to himself, as if the house could hear him. That's when he noticed it. One panel in the wall near the staircase that sounded wrong. He'd been prying away plasterboard for hours, and every tap had a rhythm. Hollow, then stud, then hollow again. But this one? Too hollow. He frowned, set his crowbar against it, and pried gently. The panel gave with a sigh. Dust puffed into his face. Behind it, tucked neatly into the narrow cavity between studs, was a small leather-bound book. He blinked. What the hell? The cover was cracked, dark brown, the leather stiff with age. There was no lock, no title, no name. Just a faint scent, like old paper and smoke. He turned it over in his hands, feeling the texture, the slight stickiness of decay. When he opened it, the spine creaked softly, like an exhale after years of silence. The first page was dated March 8th, 2015, nearly 10 years ago. The handwriting was neat but deliberate, like someone trying very hard to appear calm. It's been 3 nights since I heard him again. The one in the attic. I told myself it's just the pipes, or maybe a squirrel. But tonight, I heard footsteps. Slow, careful ones, right above my bed. Ethan frowned, flipping the page. I checked the attic this morning. Nothing, just dust, insulation, a few old boxes, but I can't shake the feeling someone's here, watching. The mirrors feel wrong. The light changes when I move. He flipped a few more pages, each one more unsettling than the last. Entries about doors opening in the night, about photographs being moved, about someone whispering his name when he was alone. Then, about halfway through, he saw a familiar word. A man came to see the house today. The realtor says he's serious about buying it. His name's Ethan Clark. Works in marketing. Drives a blue sedan. Lives alone. Ethan froze. The pen slipped from his fingers. The silence of the house suddenly felt heavier, closer. He stared at the page again, certain he'd misread it. But no, there it was. His name, his job, his car, the exact details of his life. His mind began to spin, fast, unfocused. He hadn't bought the house until this year. The diary was dated almost a decade earlier. It wasn't possible. He kept reading. He seems kind, quiet, a little lost maybe, but I can't let him take it. Not yet. He doesn't know I'm watching yet. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. The edges of the page trembled slightly in his hands. He shut the diary, exhaling hard. "This is a joke," he said under his breath. "Some stupid prank." But no one had been inside this wall for years. He was the first to open it. He looked around the gutted room, the exposed framework, the stripped paint, the shadowed corners. The house felt smaller somehow, closer. He set the diary down on a workbench and stepped outside for air. The street was bathed in fading sunlight, golden and quiet. A few neighbors he barely knew passed by. A woman walking a dog, an older man trimming hedges. Nothing strange. Normal life. But when Ethan turned back toward his house, he noticed something odd. The front window on the second floor, his bedroom, was open. He was sure he'd closed it that morning. He hesitated, then forced a laugh. "Right. Draft," he muttered. But the laugh didn't reach his eyes. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about the diary. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settling. Every creak felt sharper. Every rustle, a whisper. The words replayed in his head again and again. "He doesn't know I'm watching yet." He turned on the lamp, sat up, and rubbed his face. Maybe he should just throw it away, or burn it. But curiosity itched at the back of his skull. He couldn't. Not yet. At 2:17 a.m., unable to sleep, he got up and went downstairs. The diary was still on the workbench, waiting. He sat in the dim kitchen light, flipping through more pages. March 22nd. The man outside the window again. He stands there for hours sometimes, just watching. I've stopped calling the police. They never find him. March 25th. I heard breathing through the vent. When I whispered hello, it stopped. But when I turned off the light, it started again. April 1st. I think he's inside. The entries stopped there, except for one final page, dated April 8th, 2015, exactly 1 week before Ethan moved in this year. It read, "He doesn't know I'm watching yet." And taped beneath it, yellowed and curling at the edges, was a photograph. Ethan felt his stomach drop. It was a photo of him, standing in this very room, wearing the same clothes he was wearing now, same work gloves, same light from the window. He dropped the diary, heart racing. It hit the floor with a dull thud, pages fanning open. He backed away, eyes darting toward the corners of the room, half expecting to see someone there. But there was nothing. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock. He grabbed his phone, snapped a quick photo of the diary and the picture, then locked the front door, double-checked the windows, and went upstairs. He left the lights on. But even then, sleep didn't come. Somewhere around 3 a.m., he thought he heard something faint, a slow creak from the attic above. He froze, every muscle locking. Then silence. He told himself it was the wind, the old beams settling. anything but footsteps. Still, his eyes stayed open until the first gray light of dawn spilled through the window. The next morning, Ethan drove to the local records office. He told himself it was just for curiosity's sake. But in truth, he needed answers. The house had been built in the 1960s, owned by a few families, sold a handful of times. Nothing unusual on paper. But there was one entry that caught his attention. Owner before him, Matthew Reeve. Died 2015. Cause? Unknown. Ethan stared at the record. The date matched the last diary entry. He leaned closer. How did he die? He asked the clerk, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses and tired eyes. She glanced at the screen, then frowned. That's odd. It says, undetermined. Found dead inside the house. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. Was anyone else living with him? She shook her head. No, just him. He thanked her and left. His thoughts a storm. Undetermined cause. Found inside the house. When he got home, the air felt heavier. Stagnant. He tried to shake the feeling, putting on music, opening the windows wide, drowning himself in the noise of normalcy. But around sunset, he noticed something strange again. The diary. He left it on the workbench. Now, it was on the kitchen counter. Open. He froze, scanning the room. The back door was locked, the windows too. He approached slowly. The page it was open to wasn't one he remembered reading. It said, he started reading. I can feel him in the walls again. Maybe this time he'll find me. Ethan's skin prickled. His breath came short and fast. He slammed the diary shut, tossed it into a drawer, and grabbed his phone. He called his best friend, Adam. Hey, Adam answered groggily. You sound freaked out. What's going on? Ethan hesitated. How could he even begin to explain this without sounding insane? There's something off about this place, he said finally. I found a diary in the wall. The guy who lived here before, Matthew Reeve, he wrote about someone watching him. Then he died. And what? There's a photo of me from right now. But it was left there years ago. Silence on the other end. Then a slow, nervous laugh. You're kidding. I'm not, Adam sighed. Look, man, you've been alone in that house for weeks, tearing it apart, not sleeping. It's probably just some kind of old photo that looks like you. You're freaking yourself out. Maybe. Ethan rubbed his temple. Maybe. Want me to come by? No, it's fine. I just needed to talk it out. But it wasn't fine. That night, he couldn't bring himself to touch the diary again. He left it locked in the drawer. But even from upstairs, he could swear he heard it sometimes. A faint rustle, like paper shifting. By midnight, rain began to fall. The house creaked and sighed with it. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, staring toward the ceiling. There was that faint sound again. Movement. In the attic. He stood slowly, heart thudding, and reached for the flashlight on his nightstand. The ladder to the attic was in the hallway ceiling, a simple pull-down hatch. He hesitated beneath it, listening. The rain masked most sounds, but he thought he caught the faintest whisper of movement. He swallowed, gripped the cord, and pulled. The ladder unfolded with a soft, dry squeal. A draft of cold air spilled down, carrying the scent of dust and something else, something faintly sour. He climbed, step by slow step, flashlight trembling in his hand. The beam cut through the dark, revealing wooden beams, insulation, old boxes. Hello? His voice was small, swallowed by the space. Nothing. He swept the light across the attic. Cobwebs. Forgotten furniture. A cracked mirror leaning against the far wall. Then, something caught his eye. Footprints. In the dust. fresh, leading toward the mirror. He crouched, staring. They weren't his. Smaller, maybe. Barefoot. The flashlight beam quivered slightly. He forced himself to stand, walking slowly toward the mirror. His reflection stared back, pale, tired, anxious. The mirror was old, its glass warped, reflecting the light in strange ripples. He leaned closer, breath fogging the surface. Something moved behind him. He spun around, light flashing wildly. Nothing. Just shadows, boxes, the hum of wind through the vents. He exhaled shakily. "You're losing it, Clark," he whispered. But when he turned back toward the mirror, there were two reflections. For a heartbeat, his mind refused to process it. Then his pulse surged. There was someone standing behind him. He spun around again. Nothing. Just emptiness. When he looked back, the second reflection was gone. He backed away, stumbled down the ladder, and slammed the hatch shut. He barely slept that night. When morning came, he avoided the attic completely. But when he went downstairs, he found the diary waiting on the table again, open to a new page. "He saw me." Ethan's hand trembled as he reached for it. There were no more entries after that. Just that one line, written in fresh ink. He dropped it, stumbling back, eyes darting around the room. The windows, the corners, the mirror above the mantel. Every reflection suddenly felt wrong, slightly delayed, slightly off. The photo was still taped to the last page, but now, when he looked closer, there was something new in the background, something he hadn't noticed before. A figure, faint, standing just behind him, watching. Ethan's heart stopped. He tore the photo free, staring at it in disbelief. The figure's face was blurred, but its outline was clear, a shape in the shadows just over his shoulder. And as he looked up, he realized the light in the room had shifted, subtly but unmistakably. The sun had gone behind the clouds, but it wasn't just that. The shadows had changed shape. Something was standing in the corner that hadn't been there before. For a long moment, Ethan couldn't move. His body refused to obey the impulse to turn, to run, to even breathe. The air in the room seemed to solidify, thick, humming, alive with something unseen. He blinked once, twice. The corner of the room was darker than it should have been. The late afternoon light from the window cut across the floor, but stopped just shy of that shadow, as if the darkness itself had weight. "Hello?" His voice cracked, a whisper swallowed by the house. Nothing. He stared, muscles coiled tight. The shape was human, or nearly so, tall, still, shoulders slightly slanted as if watching him. But when he took a single step forward, the outline seemed to shift, melt, dissolve back into the dimness until there was only the corner again. Empty. Ethan exhaled hard, shaking his head. "No," he whispered. "No, I'm not." He stopped, ran a hand over his face, and laughed without humor. "Okay. Sleep deprivation. Stress. That's all this is." He turned on every light in the living room, flooding it with brightness until the shadows vanished. The air didn't change. The silence stayed thick. The diary lay open on the table where he'd dropped it, pages fluttering slightly from the draft seeping through the cracks in the windows. The single line stared back at him like a taunt. "He saw me." He closed it carefully, placed it inside a kitchen drawer, and this time, locked it. Then he grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. The evening air was cool, smelling faintly of rain and cut grass. The neighborhood seemed almost offensively normal. A boy rode his bike past, a couple walked their dog, someone was grilling 2 houses down. He needed distance, movement, something ordinary to anchor him again. He walked aimlessly for a while, past tidy lawns and hedges, the rhythmic click of sprinklers filling the air. But even as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was pacing their steps behind him. Every few blocks, he'd glance back. Nothing. Just the empty street. When he finally returned home, dusk had deepened into night. The windows of his house glowed with a faint yellow light, and for a brief second, he thought he saw a silhouette move past one of them. He froze. His heart jolted. The front door was locked. He was sure of it. He hurried up the steps, fumbling with his keys, pushing the door open with a burst of adrenaline. "Hello?" His voice echoed. The lights were still on. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. Tools on the workbench, the ladder by the wall, the faint smell of paint. And yet, something felt off. It took him a moment to realize what it was. The photo, the one from the diary, was now on the refrigerator door, held there by a small red magnet. Ethan's chest constricted. He hadn't put it there. He approached slowly, dread curling up from his stomach. The photo was the same. Him, standing in that room. But now, the shadowed figure behind him was clearer. Its head tilted slightly, the shape of a hand visible near his shoulder. He snatched it down, crumpling it in his hand. A sudden sound made him freeze, a dull creak from above. The attic again. He looked up toward the ceiling, pulse hammering. "No," he whispered to himself. "Not tonight." But the creak came again, slow, deliberate. Something, or someone, was up there. He grabbed the crowbar leaning near the door and made his way up the stairs. Each step moaned beneath his weight. He stopped beneath the attic hatch, gripping the handle tightly. He hesitated, listening. Nothing now. Just silence. He reached up, pulled the cord, and waited as the ladder unfolded. The air that drifted down was colder than before. He climbed. The beam of his flashlight shook slightly as he swept it across the attic. Nothing. Just the same dusty boxes, the same warped mirror, the same old wooden beams. But then his light caught something new. In the far corner, where the insulation had been pulled away, there was a small hole in the wall, barely visible. A gap between the beams, large enough for someone to have slid something inside, or through. He crouched, shining the light closer. Something glinted inside the dark space. He reached in carefully, fingers brushing against something metallic. He pulled it free. A small silver key, tarnished with age. Attached to it was a brittle tag with fading ink. The word barely legible. Basement. Ethan frowned. The basement door had always been locked since he'd moved in. He'd assumed it was just jammed. He stood there for a moment, the key heavy in his palm, the silence pressing in around him. Then he descended the ladder slowly, the wooden steps creaking underfoot. Downstairs, the air felt heavier, thicker, as if it knew what he was about to do. The basement door was in the hallway near the kitchen, paint peeling, handle rusted. He inserted the key. It turned with a reluctant click. He exhaled, pulled the door open. The smell hit him first. Damp earth, mold, something old and sour. He flicked the light switch. Nothing. He grabbed a flashlight from the counter, aimed it into the dark, and started down. The stairs were concrete, slick with moisture. The deeper he went, the colder it became. At the bottom, the beam of light revealed a small room. Unfinished walls, exposed pipes, shelves lined with dusty jars and paint cans. He stepped forward, scanning the space. Nothing unusual, just another neglected part of the house. Then he noticed something on the far wall. A square patch of drywall that looked newer than the rest. Fresh plaster, faintly different color. He approached, running his fingers along the edge. It wasn't part of the original structure. Someone had covered something. He grabbed a hammer from a nearby shelf and struck the wall. Once. Twice. The plaster cracked, dust falling like snow. He tore at it with his hands until the hole was wide enough to see inside. There was a small cavity behind the wall, just large enough for a person to crouch in. And inside it, a chair. A small wooden chair. A camera tripod facing outward through a peephole in the drywall. Ethan's blood turned to ice. He stepped closer, shining the flashlight on the floor. There were wrappers, a cracked mug, and scraps of paper. He picked one up. It was a torn page from a notebook, the same handwriting as the diary. He sleeps with the light on. It flickers at 3:12 a.m. every night. That's when I watch him. Ethan stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. Someone had been here, living in his walls, watching. He swept the light across the small space again, and then froze. There was something else taped to the inside of the cavity. Another photograph. His hands trembled as he peeled it free. It was him. Again. Asleep in his bed. Taken from above. He staggered back, gasping, flashlight shaking wildly. He bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind him. His mind was a storm of panic and disbelief. Who had taken those photos? Who had lived down there? He grabbed his phone and called Adam again. This time, his voice was barely coherent. Adam, listen to me. There's a room in the basement, a hidden one. Someone's been living in my house, watching me. I found photos of me sleeping. Whoa, slow down, Adam said. You sure? Like, not some leftover from before? They're recent. Ethan's voice broke. They have to be. The ink on the diary is fresh. There was silence on the line. Then, I'm coming over. Don't move. The call ended. Ethan sank to the floor, head in his hands trembling. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, every second scraping against his nerves. When Adam arrived, 20 minutes later, he looked pale but skeptical. Okay, show me. Ethan led him down the basement steps, flashlight in hand. But when they reached the bottom, the smell was gone. The patched drywall was smooth, perfect. No hole. Ethan froze. It was right here. Right here. Adam ran his hand over the wall. Solid. Seamless. Man, you've been breathing in dust and paint fumes for days. Maybe you... I'm not imagining this, Ethan shouted. I found photos. He dug into his pocket, but the photos weren't there. The diary wasn't in the drawer either when he checked. Gone. Adam's face softened slightly, concern replacing doubt. You need rest, Ethan. Seriously. Take a night off. Come crash at my place if you want. Ethan shook his head. No, I'm staying. After Adam left, the house felt heavier again, as if it had exhaled once he was gone. He searched for the diary for hours, through drawers, under furniture, behind boxes. Nothing. It wasn't until nearly midnight that he noticed the faintest sliver of light seeping from beneath the attic hatch. He froze. The ladder was still up. He hadn't opened it since that morning. He swallowed hard, gripping the crowbar again. No more games, he whispered. He climbed. The attic air was still cold, dry, electric. The light came from the far corner near the mirror. A small lantern, one he didn't own, sat on the floor, casting a dim orange glow. And there, propped against the wall, was the diary. Open. Waiting. He stepped closer, each breath louder than the last. The new entry shimmered in wet ink. He found the room. He knows now. I told him not to look. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. He flipped the page, hands shaking violently. Another line. I'm sorry, Ethan. I had to make sure you were the one. His eyes darted around the attic, every shadow alive, every sound amplified. Who's there? He shouted. A soft creak answered him from behind the mirror. He turned. The mirror was old, mottled with age, but something moved within its reflection that wasn't in the room. A shape. A hand. He stepped closer, drawn despite the terror clawing through him. His own reflection trembled in the glass, and behind it, someone else's eyes. Dark. Watching. He reached out. The glass was cold beneath his fingers, but it pulsed. Just barely. Like a heartbeat. Then a voice. Soft. Close. Not from behind him, but from the glass itself. Don't break it. Ethan stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. The beam spun across the floor, slicing through dust and shadow. He scrambled toward the hatch, half falling down the ladder, hitting the ground hard. The crowbar clattered away. For several minutes, he just sat there, shaking, staring up at the ceiling, unable to breathe properly. When he finally moved, he locked the attic hatch shut and shoved a chair beneath it. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the living room with every light on, crowbar across his lap, staring at the darkened staircase. At some point near dawn, exhaustion took him. He woke to sunlight filtering through the curtains. The clock read 9:45. His neck ached. And there, on the coffee table in front of him, was the diary again. Open. This time it wasn't written in the same hand. It was his. I saw her. In the mirror. She's not gone. Ethan's breath hitched. He hadn't written that, but the pen strokes were undeniably his. He dropped the book as if burned, stepping back, chest tight. That's when he heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping, coming from upstairs, from behind the mirror. The tapping was faint, deliberate. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 again. Ethan stood frozen at the bottom of the staircase, his eyes fixed on the ceiling above where the attic hatch waited, sealed, locked, the chair still wedged beneath it. The morning light pouring through the window should have softened the house, made it harmless. But instead it only made the shadows sharper. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to move. One slow step at a time, he climbed the stairs. His pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out everything else. The hum of the refrigerator, the wind outside, even his breath. At the top of the stairs he stopped. The house fell still. No sound now. No tapping. Just silence. Heavy as fog. He reached for the attic cord. His fingers trembled. The wood beneath him creaked softly, as if reacting to his fear. He pulled. The hatch didn't budge. The chair beneath it held fast. He stared at it for a long time before he whispered, "You're not real. You're not there." Then, as if to prove it to himself, he turned away. But as he descended the stairs, a single, soft knock came from behind the hatch. He froze mid-step. It wasn't the house settling. It wasn't the wind. It was a reply. He walked faster. Downstairs, sunlight cut through the windows, illuminating the dust floating in the air. Everything looked normal. The couch, the table, the tools on the floor. But the diary still sat open on the coffee table where he'd dropped it. He forced himself to look at it. The words he'd seen earlier, his own handwriting, were still there. I saw her. In the mirror. She's not gone. But now there was another line below it. She wants you to finish it. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He spoke to the empty room. Finish what? No answer. He closed the diary, shoved it into a box, and taped the box shut. Then he carried it out to his car and threw it in the trunk. The slam of metal was loud. Final. He stood there for a second, breathing hard. He needed air. Distance. He drove. No destination. Just movement. Out of the neighborhood. Past the grocery store. Past the empty fields beyond town. The road stretched ahead, sun glaring through the windshield, the hum of the tires steady and hypnotic. His phone buzzed. A text from Adam. Adam, you okay? Been thinking about yesterday. We can call someone if you want. Maybe talk to the realtor? Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he drove until the road turned into gravel, until the houses gave way to trees and silence. He pulled over by the edge of a narrow lake. The surface of the water was still, mirror-like. He stepped out of the car. The air was crisp, cool. He knelt by the edge, staring at his reflection rippling faintly on the surface. His own eyes stared back, tired and uncertain. He whispered, "What's happening to me?" A breeze rippled the water. His reflection shifted, and for the briefest instant, he saw someone standing behind him in the image. A woman. Pale. Motionless. He spun around. Nothing. The trees were quiet. The air still again. He stumbled back toward the car, heart pounding. When he yanked open the door, his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. You shouldn't have opened the wall. His fingers went numb. He stared at the screen. The number was unfamiliar. He typed quickly. "Who is this?" No response. A minute passed. Then another buzz. "Unknown number. She's been waiting for you." Ethan turned the phone off. He sat in the car for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight they ached. He didn't move until the sun began to sink low in the sky. When he finally drove home, the streetlights were flickering on. The house looked the same from the outside, but as soon as he stepped in, he felt it. The air was wrong again. Thicker. The kind of stillness that hums just beneath hearing. Like the moment before a storm. He went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and froze halfway through his sip. The reflection in the glass, tiny, warped, showed something moving behind him. He turned fast. Nothing. But the faint scent of old smoke hung in the air. He whispered to himself, "You're imagining things. It's just imagination." Then from the living room came a soft creak, the sound of footsteps. He set the glass down and picked up the crowbar again. "Who's there?" His voice cracked the silence. No answer. He took slow steps toward the living room. The floor groaned beneath his feet. The curtains stirred slightly, though no window was open. A faint draft brushed against his neck. And then, from the far corner, he heard a whisper. Soft. Female. "Ethan." He froze. The crowbar slipped from his hand, landing on the floor with a metallic clatter. "Who are you?" he whispered. The air shifted. A shadow flickered along the wall. For a moment, it looked like someone was standing near the doorway, facing him. A faint silhouette. Thin arms. Tilted head. But when he blinked, it was gone. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a box. His hand brushed against the edge of the workbench, and something fell to the floor with a soft thud. The diary. He stared at it, unblinking. He locked it in the car trunk. He picked it up slowly, his hands trembling. The pages fluttered open as if caught by an unseen breeze. A photo slipped out and landed on the floor face up. It was the same photo of him standing in the room, only now, the figure behind him was clearer. It was a woman. Her face pale, eyes hollow, lips slightly parted as if whispering something. The handwriting on the photo read, "Look behind the mirror." Ethan's breath came in short bursts. He whispered, No, I'm not doing this." But even as he said it, something inside him, curiosity, or madness, or both, pushed him forward. He grabbed the flashlight again and climbed the stairs. The attic hatch was still blocked with the chair. He pushed it aside, yanked the cord. The ladder unfolded with a dry shriek. Cold air poured down. He climbed. The mirror stood where he'd left it, leaning slightly against the far wall, reflecting the beam of his light back at him in a pale shimmer. The lantern was gone. He approached slowly, his reflection swaying with each step. His heart pounded so loud it felt like it filled the room. He crouched beside the mirror and pressed his ear against it. Silence. Then faintly, something like breathing. He swallowed, tracing the edge of the frame. His fingers found a small indentation near the bottom, a latch, or hinge. He pulled. The mirror swung open on quiet hinges, revealing a narrow hollow space behind it. Inside was a small compartment lined with photographs, each pinned to the wood with rusted nails. Every photo showed him sleeping, eating, working. Some taken from above, some through reflections, mirrors, windows, even his phone screen. He stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. Then he noticed something else tucked in the corner. A small cassette tape, labeled in smudged ink. April 8th, the date of the last diary entry. He hesitated, then took it. Downstairs, he rummaged through boxes until he found an old tape player he'd used for recording work notes years ago. His hand shook as he slid the tape inside and pressed play. A crackle of static. Then a man's voice. Tired, frantic, whispering. If anyone finds this, don't stay here. Don't look. It's not the house. It's the reflection. She lives in it. She sees through it. Every mirror, every glass surface. Don't... The voice cut off with a sharp scrape, followed by muffled breathing. She's here. Then silence. Ethan stopped the tape, heart hammering. The voice. It had to be Matthew Reeve, the previous owner. He stared at his own reflection in the dark screen of the TV across the room. For a moment, he could swear there was another shape standing behind his reflected self. He turned the TV around to face the wall. He walked through the house, covering every mirror, every reflective surface. Sheets over the bathroom mirror, the silver toaster turned face down. Even the glass in picture frames flipped backward. When he reached the hallway, he saw something that made him stop. The mirror he'd pulled from the attic now hung on the wall, perfectly centered, as if it had always been there. His pulse spiked. He hadn't moved it. The glass shimmered faintly, reflecting the dim light like water. Then faintly, a face appeared in it. Not his. A woman's. Her eyes were sunken, her hair damp as if she'd just come in from rain. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Ethan stumbled backward, hitting the wall. The glass surface rippled once, like disturbed water. Then, with a soft crack, a thin fracture appeared across the mirror's surface, starting from her face and spreading outward like a web. The sound grew, a sharp, high hum, like metal vibrating. He covered his ears and shouted, "Stop!" The sound ceased instantly. The fracture vanished. The mirror was whole again. The woman's reflection was gone. He stood there, panting, staring at his own terrified face staring back. Then his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "It's not her you should be afraid of." He froze. "Who are you?" he whispered into the empty air. The reply came almost immediately. "Unknown number. It's you." He dropped the phone. It clattered against the floor, screen lighting up the ceiling in a cold glow. He backed away until his shoulders hit the wall. His mind was unraveling, thoughts twisting and colliding. If the diary knew things before they happened, if it had his handwriting before he wrote it, then maybe it wasn't just about watching. Maybe it was about repeating. He grabbed the diary again, flipping through pages desperately, searching for something, anything that explained it. Near the end, just before the final entry, a page had been torn out. Only the jagged remnants of paper remained, but faintly, in the margin, someone had written, "He always finds it again." Ethan sank to the floor, head in his hands. His pulse wouldn't slow. The walls seemed to lean closer. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping gently against the windows. The house exhaled again. A long, low creak. He looked up at the mirror one last time. His reflection smiled at him, but he hadn't. The smile in the mirror lingered just a heartbeat too long. Ethan stared, breath frozen in his chest, waiting for the reflection to fall back into sync. But it didn't. It tilted its head just slightly, its eyes sharpening with something almost human, almost knowing. Then it spoke. Finally. The voice was his, but not quite. Deeper. Stretched at the edges like a recording slowed just enough to sound wrong. Ethan stumbled backward, knocking over a lamp. It crashed to the floor, the bulb shattering in a spray of sparks. The reflection stayed perfectly still. His own voice, trembling, filled the dark. "What are you?" The reflection smiled wider. "You already know." "No." His back hit the wall. "No, this isn't real. You're not real." The reflection stepped forward, but Ethan didn't. The distance between them shrank until the mirrored version pressed its hand against the glass. The surface rippled, like water. "I watched you," it said softly. "You did everything just like before. The same steps, the same fears, the same mistakes." Ethan shook his head, gripping his hair. "Stop. Stop talking like you know me." "I am you," the reflection said. "Or at least, I was." A cold pulse rippled through the air. The lights flickered, then went out completely, leaving only the faint blue glow from the window. In that dim light, Ethan could still see his other self, smiling, calm, patient. "Do you know how many times we've done this?" the reflection whispered. "You find the diary, you hear the voice, you dig, you look, and every time you swear you'll walk away. But you never do. You stay. You feed it." Ethan's pulse thudded in his ears. "Feed what?" "The house," the reflection said. "It doesn't live off blood or time. It lives off patterns, repetition, memory. Every time you remember, it starts again. You write it. I live it. Then you come home." It lifted its hand from the glass, and Ethan's mirror image didn't fall away. Instead, the reflection stayed pressed to the surface, palm still there, as though trapped behind invisible water. Ethan inched closer, despite every instinct screaming to run. "You're lying." "Am I?" The reflection tilted its head. "Look around you." Ethan turned slowly. The house was no longer empty. The walls shimmered faintly, shifting with pale outlines. Faces in the plaster, hands pressed against the wallpaper, whispering beneath the paint. The air hummed with a low vibration. A sound like murmured prayers played backward. He staggered back, hitting the table. The diary slid off and hit the floor, pages fanning open. The handwriting shifted before his eyes, letters curling, erasing, rewriting themselves. He knelt down and read. He's beginning to remember. The words appeared, stroke by stroke, in real time. He slammed the book shut. The reflection laughed softly. "You think closing it stops it?" Ethan picked up the crowbar again, raising it high. "If I break the mirror..." "You tried that before." The word stopped him. His hands trembled, metal clutched tight. "Before?" The reflection nodded slowly. "Every time you find me, it starts again. You tear down walls, you find the diary, you see the photo. Then you come here and you look into me. That's how the house remembers. That's how you return. You don't have to believe me. You just have to finish it." The words echoed. The same phrase from the diary. "She wants you to finish it." Ethan's chest heaved. "What does that mean?" "Finish what?" But before the reflection could answer, the lights flared back on, flooding the room in a sterile brightness. For the first time, Ethan saw what was inside the mirror clearly. It wasn't a reflection at all. The room inside the glass wasn't his living room. It was older, faded, filled with furniture that no longer existed, dust floating like snow. A figure stood within it, a woman thin and pale, her hair hanging in strings over her face. She faced the other Ethan, the one in the mirror. He turned slowly toward her, and she smiled. Ethan stepped back, shaking his head. No. No, no, no. The air around him thickened. The house began to groan, every beam and floorboard crying out as if something deep within the walls was shifting awake. The woman in the mirror raised her hand and placed it against the glass, right where Ethan's reflection stood. The two silhouettes merged, hers fading into his. Then she looked directly at Ethan. Her eyes were black. The mirror rippled again, harder this time, and suddenly a crack tore across the surface, splitting her image in two. A faint gust of wind blew through the house, though every window was closed. Ethan screamed, swinging the crowbar down. Glass shattered outward in a burst of light. The sound was deafening. When it cleared, the mirror lay in 1,000 glittering shards across the floor. Ethan fell to his knees among them, chest heaving, heart hammering. For a long, long moment, there was silence. Then from the shards, a faint voice whispered, his own. "You shouldn't have done that." He looked down. The reflections in the shards weren't still. Each tiny fragment showed his face at a slightly different angle, different expressions, different moments. In one, his mouth was open mid-scream. In another, he was smiling. In another, he was watching himself from behind. Every reflection blinked out of sync. Then one by one, they began to move on their own. Ethan scrambled back, cutting his palms on the glass. He bolted for the door, but the house seemed to stretch, the hallway growing longer, the walls narrowing. Every mirror he'd covered was uncovered again, every surface shining. Each one held a different version of him, some older, some younger, all watching. He ran. Down the hall, into the kitchen, out the back door. Except the door wasn't there anymore, just a wall of glass. And in the reflection, himself again, standing calm, crowbar in hand, expression unreadable. "Let me out," he shouted, pounding his fists against it. The reflection stepped closer until they were face to face through the barrier. Then it said, quietly, "You're home." The glass rippled once more, and the reflection reached out, its hand pressed against the surface, sinking through as if the barrier were made of liquid. Ethan screamed, pushing back, but the hand gripped his wrist with cold, inhuman strength and pulled. There was a flash of light, a rush of wind, then nothing. Silence. When the air settled, the glass was smooth again, the room empty. The diary sat on the floor beside the broken mirror. Its cover was open to a fresh page. Slowly, letters began to appear in neat, measured handwriting. "He doesn't know I'm watching yet." A faint reflection flickered in the shards. Not Ethan. Someone else. A young woman. Standing in the same room. Holding a hammer. Looking around in confusion. "Found a diary," she murmured softly, brushing the dust off its cover. "Weird place to hide one." She smiled faintly, unaware of the faint outline moving behind her reflection. The cycle had begun again. And yet, somewhere deep within the mirror, Ethan's face flickered for a moment, watching, waiting. Then the light went out. When we look into the mirror, do we ever truly see ourselves? Or just the version of us that the world reflects back? What if the places we inhabit remember us in ways we can't understand, echoing our fears, our mistakes, our patterns, like endless loops replaying through time? Would you open the wall if you knew something on the other side had already written your next move? And if every reflection holds a fragment of who you were, how do you know which side you're really on? A package arrived at my door with no label, just my name. Inside was a small wooden box containing a wedding ring, engraved with my initials and tomorrow's date. I thought it was a prank, until my girlfriend saw it and fainted. When she woke, she said, "That's the ring you gave me, the day you died." It began on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, the kind that passes without notice. The sky a dull slate, the air heavy with the faint smell of rain. Michael Reed was sitting at his kitchen table, laptop open, eyes glazed over a spreadsheet he no longer cared about. His apartment, a one-bedroom on the second floor of a quiet cul-de-sac, was still half unpacked even after 3 months of living there. Boxes leaned like tired sentinels against the walls, reminders of a life in progress. Or maybe a life on pause. When the knock came, it startled him. He wasn't expecting anyone. He opened the door to find a small cardboard package on the mat. No delivery truck in sight. No footsteps retreating down the hall. Just that plain box, unmarked, except for his name written neatly across the top in black ink. Michael Reed. He crouched down, frowning. There was no address label, no sender, no barcode, no sign of where it had come from. He lifted it, light, but with something solid inside. A soft rattle like wood brushing against cardboard. He hesitated for a moment, half thinking of leaving it outside, but curiosity was already a thread pulling him forward. Inside, nested in brown paper, was a small wooden box, polished mahogany, the kind of craftsmanship you rarely see anymore. No lock, just a sliding lid. And when he opened it, a single object gleamed under the dull kitchen light. A wedding ring. Gold. Worn, but shining. And inside the band, an engraving. He squinted, leaning closer. The letters were cleanly carved. MR, his own initials. Beneath them, a date. Tomorrow's date. Michael froze. The world seemed to narrow around him. The hum of the refrigerator faded. The ticking wall clock grew louder. He blinked, as if it might change under a second look. But no. The same engraving. His initials. The date that hadn't yet come. What the hell? He muttered under his breath. His first thought was that it was a prank. Maybe a cruel one. He had co-workers with a twisted sense of humor. Or maybe his ex, Sophie, though that didn't seem like her style. She'd left him 6 months ago with nothing but an apologetic note and silence ever since. But who else would know his initials, his address, and why a ring? He sat at the table again, the box before him like a question he didn't know how to answer. He turned the ring over in his palm. It was warm. Though he hadn't worn it, he could almost feel an indentation, like it had belonged to him once, molded to the shape of his finger. That night, he texted his girlfriend Claire. She was supposed to come over after her shift. They'd been dating for 5 months, a gentle, steady kind of relationship that felt like healing after Sophie. Claire was an art teacher, full of small gestures that made Michael feel like he could start over again. When she arrived around 9, the box was still on the table. "Hey," she said, smiling as she stepped in, brushing off the chill of the night. But the smile faded when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" He gestured toward the package. "That came today." She looked down at the box, then at him. "Who's it from?" "There's no label, just my name. No address, no return, nothing." She frowned, leaning in to look. "What's inside?" He opened the lid, letting the light catch the gold. The change in her was immediate. Her breath hitched, her face drained of color. Her hand went to her mouth. "Claire?" She took a step back, her eyes locked on the ring. "Where did you get that?" "I told you. It just showed up." She shook her head, voice trembling. No, that's... Before she could finish, her knees buckled. Michael barely caught her before she hit the floor. Her body went limp, her pulse fluttering under his fingers. He called her name again, heart hammering. It took several seconds before her eyes fluttered open. When she saw him, she recoiled. Not in confusion, but in fear. "That's the ring," she whispered. "That's the ring you gave me. The day you died." The words didn't make sense. For a moment, he thought he'd misheard. "What?" She stared past him, as if seeing something he couldn't. "You gave it to me at the cabin. We were standing by the lake. It was raining. You were laughing. You said, 'Nothing lasts forever except this.' And then," her eyes filled with tears, "you walked outside. And you never came back." Michael felt the chill creep up his spine. "Claire, that never happened." Her gaze snapped to his. "It did. I remember every second." He didn't know what to say. She was trembling, clutching the edge of the counter as if to steady herself. "Maybe you had a dream," he tried. Or maybe... But she was already shaking her head. "It wasn't a dream." She took the ring from his hand, studying the engraving through tears. "You said it was our date. You said tomorrow would change everything." The silence between them grew heavy. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You shouldn't be here." "Claire." She turned toward the door, unsteady, pale. "I can't. I just need to think." Before he could stop her, she was gone, the door slamming behind her, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Michael stood there for a long time, the empty air humming with tension. The apartment felt colder. The ring still sat in his palm, its weight unnatural, as if it carried more than metal. He tried to sleep that night, but the sound of rain tapping against the window kept him awake. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Claire's face, pale, terrified, remembering something that shouldn't exist. At 2 a.m., he got up and poured a glass of water. The ring was still on the counter. In the dim kitchen light, the engraving caught a faint reflection. MR, EN below it. That impossible date. Tomorrow. He picked it up again. The longer he stared, the more a strange familiarity tugged at the edges of his memory. The curve of the band. The pattern of scratches near the inner edge. It was like something from another life, one he couldn't quite reach. The next morning, he called Claire. No answer. He texted her. Nothing. At work, his mind wasn't there. Every sound felt distant. The chatter of coworkers, the clack of keyboards, the hum of office lights. The world seemed slightly out of sync, like he was walking through a memory instead of reality. At lunch, he found himself looking at his reflection in the window. There was something odd about it. He couldn't place it at first, but his reflection seemed a fraction of a second late, lagging behind his movements. He blinked hard, and it corrected itself. But a cold sweat ran down his spine. When he returned home that evening, the box was gone. He froze in the doorway. He hadn't touched it since last night. The counter was clean, empty except for a faint outline in the dust where the box had been. He called Claire again, panic in his chest. Straight to voicemail. That night, as the wind picked up and the streetlights flickered outside, he sat by the window, staring into the dark. A knock came at 9:14 p.m. He hesitated before opening the door. There was no one there, just another box, identical to the first. His name again, in the same black ink. Hands trembling, he brought it inside. The weight was the same, the wooden box inside was the same, but this time, when he opened it, there were 2 rings. One engraved MR with tomorrow's date. The other, CL Claire's initials. And beneath them, The same date. He didn't sleep that night. At dawn, he drove to her apartment. The door was unlocked. Inside, the lights were off, but her bag and phone were on the table. Her car was still in the driveway. The air smelled faintly of rain and something metallic. He found her sitting on the floor of her bedroom, her face pale, eyes wide and glassy, staring at nothing. "Claire," he whispered, kneeling beside her. She turned to him slowly, her expression hollow. "I saw you," she said softly. "I saw you last night." He shook his head. "I wasn't here." She smiled weakly, a tear sliding down her cheek. "Not this you. The other you." The air seemed to tighten around them. She lifted a trembling hand and pointed toward the corner of the room. "You were standing right there. You didn't say anything. Just watched. And then you dropped the box." Michael felt his heartbeat in his throat. "Claire," her voice cracked, "you're going to die tomorrow." Michael didn't move at first. The room was silent except for the faint hiss of rain against the window. Claire's words hung in the air like smoke. Unreal, impossible, but heavy enough to make it hard to breathe. "You're going to die tomorrow." He tried to force a laugh, but it caught in his throat. "Claire, listen to yourself. This doesn't make sense." She shook her head, eyes glistening, hands trembling as she gripped the fabric of her robe. "I thought I was losing my mind, Michael. I thought it was grief. A nightmare I made up. But when I saw you standing there last night, it was exactly how it happened." "Oh, what happened?" he asked quietly. "The night you died." He stared at her. "Claire, I'm right here." She looked at him with a sorrow so deep it made his chest ache. "That's what makes it worse." The room felt colder now. The light filtering through the rain-soaked window was gray, ghost-like. He glanced around, half expecting to find the second box still in her hands, but she hadn't seen it yet. He pulled it from his jacket and placed it on the floor between them. The sight of it made her flinch. "There's another one?" she whispered. He nodded. "It was on my doorstep last night. Same handwriting. Same everything. But there were 2 rings this time." Her breath hitched. "Show me." He slid open the lid. The gold gleamed faintly in the dim light, twin bands reflecting each other. Claire reached out slowly, like someone touching something sacred or cursed. Her fingers brushed the one engraved CL, and she froze. "This is mine," she whispered. "I had this ring in the dream, or the memory. I don't know anymore." Michael watched her, his heart pounding. "Tell me what you remember." She hesitated, tears pooling at the corners of her eyes. "We were at the cabin. You remember the one by the lake? Your uncle's old place?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah. I haven't been there in years." "You will," she said softly. "You invited me there for the weekend. You said you wanted to talk about our future. You gave me this ring. Right before the storm started." Her eyes drifted toward the window, as if seeing the scene play out again. "We argued. Not a big fight. Just words. You were nervous. You said you'd been having dreams about drowning. You kept saying you didn't feel real anymore." Michael swallowed hard. He could almost picture it. The lake, the cabin, her face framed by flickering firelight. But it was a memory that wasn't his. "And then what?" he asked. "You left. You said you needed air. I heard you go down to the dock. When I followed you, you were gone. Just gone. They said you fell in, that the storm took you." Her voice broke. "They never found your body." Michael ran a hand through his hair, the room spinning slightly. "Claire, that didn't happen. It couldn't have happened." She met his eyes, terrified, pleading. Then how do I know the ring? The engraving? The date? He didn't have an answer. The rain outside grew heavier, the sound swelling like a heartbeat. After a long silence, Claire whispered, "Tomorrow's the date." I know. Her gaze flicked toward the ring. Then maybe it's not a warning. Maybe it's a loop. He frowned. What do you mean? She took a shaky breath. What if this already happened? And it's happening again? What if you never stopped dying, Michael? Her words crawled under his skin. He pushed up from the floor, pacing the room. This is insane. Then explain the boxes, she snapped, standing now, her voice cracking with fear. Explain the handwriting, the dates, me knowing what's inside before you opened it. He couldn't. He wanted to. He wanted to say it was a mistake, a trick, a delusion. But there was something about the precision of it. The weight of the ring, the handwriting matching perfectly, the date carved cleanly, that made denial feel flimsy. Finally, he said, I need to see the cabin. Claire's eyes widened. No, I have to. If what you're saying is true, then that's where it started. She took a step toward him, desperate. If you go there, it ends the same way. Don't you understand? That's where you die. He met her gaze steadily. Then maybe I'll change it. Her lips parted, trembling. You can't change something that's already happened. But he was already walking toward the door. The drive to the lake took 3 hours. The highway stretched in long, empty ribbons, the clouds hanging low and heavy above. Trees on either side blurred into streaks of gray-green. The world looked washed out, colorless, like an old photograph. Michael barely remembered the turns, yet his hands found them instinctively. Every curve in the road, every leaning fence post, familiar, as if he'd done this drive before. By the time he reached the cabin, the sky had begun to darken. The lake beyond it was still, an endless mirror reflecting the clouds. The cabin itself sat nestled between 2 bare trees, its roof sagging slightly, its windows blind with dust. He cut the engine and sat there for a long time. The silence was deep enough to press against his ears. When he finally stepped out, the air smelled like rain and pine. The front steps creaked under his weight. The key he'd brought, one he hadn't used in years, slid into the lock easily, as though it had been waiting. Inside, the air was cold and stale. Furniture draped with white sheets. A fireplace filled with gray ash. And on the mantel, a photograph. Him and Claire, arms around each other, smiling. He froze. He'd never seen that photo before. He moved closer. The date printed on the corner. Last summer. But he hadn't met Claire until February. His hands began to shake. Something about the cabin felt wrong. Not haunted, but displaced. The clock on the wall ticked out of rhythm, its hands frozen between minutes. The air carried faint echoes, whispers of movement, like someone had just been there. He set the ring boxes on the table and turned toward the hallway. The bedroom door was ajar. Inside, a single item sat on the nightstand. A wet footprint stained the wooden floor beside it. The item was a phone. His phone. The same case. Same scratch near the volume button. But the screen lit up to show a lock screen photo. Claire's face, smiling. And at the top, the date read, October 17th, tomorrow. His pulse thundered in his ears. He picked it up. No signal. The battery icon was low, but still glowing. He scrolled through the photos, dozens of them. Him and Claire at the cabin, at restaurants, in bed. Smiling. Laughing. All impossibilities. Then one video. Dated October 17th. He pressed play. The camera shook, recording from a handheld angle. Claire's voice filled the room, soft, nervous. Okay, it's recording. Say something. His own voice answered, lighthearted. Tomorrow's the big day. Guess this is our first take at forever." He laughed, the same laugh Claire had described. The image wobbled, turned toward the lake. He watched his recorded self walk out into the rain, ring box in hand. Then static. The screen went black. Michael dropped the phone like it burned him. His reflection glimmered faintly in the window, pale, trembling. And behind his reflection, in the glass, a shape moved. He spun around. No one. Only the faint echo of footsteps receding down the dock. His breath caught. He moved toward the door, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might split his chest. Outside, the rain had started again. The dock stretched out into the dark water. Something shimmered at the edge, faint light reflecting off the lake's surface. And then he saw him. A figure standing at the end of the dock, back turned. The same jacket. The same posture. Michael froze. The figure slowly turned. It was him. Same face. Same eyes. But there was something hollow behind the expression. A faint sadness. A tiredness that ran deeper than life. Michael stumbled back. The wood slicked beneath his feet. What is this? The other him didn't speak. He only raised his hand, and in it, the same wooden box. Lightning flashed across the lake, blinding for a second. When Michael's vision cleared, the figure was gone. The dock was empty. He stood there for what felt like forever, the sound of rain and water merging into a low hum. When he finally went back inside, the air felt heavier, thick with moisture and memory. He sank into the chair near the table, staring at the two boxes. Except now there were three. The new one sat in the middle, dry despite the storm. He reached for it slowly, his pulse steady but weak. The handwriting, still his name, still perfect. Inside, only one ring. The engraving, M.R. The date, October 18th, the day after tomorrow. He didn't remember falling asleep, but when he woke, sunlight was spilling weakly through the curtains. The world outside was calm again. Birdsong, the shimmer of light on the lake. For a moment, he let himself believe it had all been a dream, until he saw the rings. 4 now. Each one slightly different. A progression of time he couldn't explain. Each engraved with a date 1 day later than the last. The air felt wrong, dense with silence. He felt like he was sitting between two realities, one pulling him forward, the other dragging him back. When the door creaked open behind him, he didn't turn immediately. He already knew who it would be. Claire stood there, drenched from the rain, eyes red from crying. She stepped inside slowly, her expression unreadable. "I told myself I wouldn't come," she whispered, "but I had to see it again." He turned toward her, the exhaustion in his eyes mirrored in hers. "You've been here before." She nodded. "Too many times." "What do you mean?" She looked at the table, at the rings. "Every time you try to change it, it just starts over." He stared at her. "You remember?" "Yes," her voice cracked. "I remember all of them. Every loop. Every time you say you'll fix it. Every time you die anyway." His breath caught. "How?" "I don't know. Maybe because I loved you. Maybe because I was the one who found you." Her hands trembled as she reached for one of the rings. "It doesn't matter how it starts. It always ends here. You at the dock. The storm. The water." Michael shook his head, desperate. "Then we'll leave. Right now. We'll drive until we can't anymore." She looked at him, a flicker of hope breaking through the fear. But then she glanced toward the window. The clouds were already gathering again. "It's too late," she whispered. The rain began again, slow and deliberate, as though the sky itself was hesitating. Each drop hit the roof like a ticking clock, counting down to something inevitable. Michael stood by the window, staring at the gathering storm over the lake. The water, once calm, rippled in uneasy circles. The reflection of the sky fractured, gray shards dancing across the surface. Claire stayed near the doorway, her hands folded tightly around the ring she had picked up, her knuckles white. She looked like someone who had lived this moment too many times to believe in escape. Michael turned toward her, voice low but steady. "You said I always die here." She nodded. "And you remember every time?" "Yes." "Then tell me how it happens." Claire hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the dock as thunder rolled in the distance. "You go out there. You say you just need to think. You always say that. I try to stop you, but you don't listen. There's lightning. You slip. You fall." He frowned. "That's it?" She swallowed hard. "No. I run after you. I go into the water. I can't find you, but then..." Her voice trembled. "Sometimes I do. And it's worse." He crossed the room, gripping her shoulders. "You said sometimes. What happens the other times?" She shook her head. "It changes. Each loop, it changes a little. Sometimes the boxes arrive earlier. Sometimes later. Sometimes you see him. The other me." She nodded, tears spilling over. "Sometimes it's you. Sometimes it isn't." Michael's jaw tightened. "Then maybe this time will be different." She looked up at him, desperate and exhausted. "You don't understand. Every time you try to fight it, it just finds another way. The lake, the storm, they're not what kills you. You are." He stared at her, confusion hardening into fear. What does that mean? But she only whispered, "You'll see." By evening, the storm had fully arrived. Rain battered the cabin, wind howling through the cracks in the walls. The power flickered twice before going out completely, plunging the room into a dim gray lit only by flashes of lightning. Michael sat by the fireplace, a single candle flickering beside him. The rings glimmered in its light. 4 perfect circles of gold, each carrying the same secret, the same promise, the same curse. Claire was upstairs, sitting near the window, staring at the lake like it was an answer she couldn't read. He couldn't sit still. His mind replayed everything. The boxes, the handwriting, the phantom version of himself standing on the dock. If there was a pattern, he had to find it. If there was a reason, it couldn't be random. He reached for the 3rd box, the one with the engraving for October 18th. Turning it over in his hand, he noticed something he hadn't before. Faint etchings along the underside of the lid. Tiny letters, barely visible. Not yet. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. The handwriting was identical to his own. He set it down, heart pounding, and reached for the 1st box, the one that had started it all. Inside, just the single ring, engraved with MR and tomorrow's date. The wood smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. And underneath the ring, tucked into the felt lining, something small and flat pressed against his fingertip. He pulled it out, a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. It was a note. His note. "If you're reading this, it means you didn't listen again." His breath hitched. "You keep thinking you can stop it. You can't. It's not about dying. It's about remembering. Every time you run, it starts again. The box, the ring, the rain. But if you stay, if you accept it, maybe she won't have to." Lightning flashed, and for an instant, his reflection in the window didn't move. It just watched him. "Michael?" Claire's voice came from upstairs, shaky but calm. He folded the note quickly and slipped it into his pocket. "Yeah?" "You should come up here." He climbed the creaking stairs slowly, candle in hand. The light swayed, throwing long shadows that danced across the walls. Claire was sitting on the bed, facing the window. Her reflection in the glass looked almost separate from her. A double, faintly delayed. "What is it?" he asked. She didn't turn. "Do you remember the night we met?" He frowned. "At the gallery?" She nodded slightly. "You said you felt like you already knew me." "I did." She looked down at her hands. "You said you'd dreamed about me before?" The memory stirred, something he'd said lightly at the time, a line to make her smile. But now it lodged in his throat like a stone. "I thought it was just a feeling," he said softly. "Maybe it was something else." The thunder rumbled again, closer this time. Claire stood, moving toward him. If this really is a loop, maybe it's not about death. Maybe it's about what we keep carrying. He watched her, every movement deliberate, fragile. Carrying what? Guilt. The word landed like a blow. She took his hand, placing her ring, in his palm. "You said something once, right before you left the cabin. You said you were sorry." He shook his head. "For what?" Her eyes filled with tears. "For what you did to me." The silence that followed was absolute. He took a step back. "What are you talking about?" Her voice trembled. "You never remembered it before." "Maybe you're starting to..." Images flickered through his mind like broken film. Flashes of movement, rain, shouting. A hand on her arm, a flash of fear in her eyes. Then darkness. He stumbled back, clutching the edge of the dresser. No, I didn't." "You didn't mean to," she said softly. "You never do." His breath came unevenly now. "Claire, please." "I drowned that night, Michael." He froze. Her voice was calm, eerily calm. "You went after me, tried to save me. But it was too late. You died too, just later. The lake took both of us. You just don't remember which came first." The candle flickered violently, nearly snuffing out. The thunder roared outside like a closing door. Michael's head spun. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding, a hollow echo in his skull. "That's not possible." Claire stepped closer, tears streaking her cheeks. "Then look." She reached for his hand and guided him to the mirror hanging near the bed. The glass was fogged, streaked from moisture. He wiped it clean, and the reflection staring back wasn't right. His face? Paler, thinner, eyes hollowed by shadows that shouldn't exist. His lips moved, but not in sync with his own words. He stumbled back, the candle clattering to the floor, flame snuffing out. Darkness swallowed the room. "Claire?" He reached for her, but his hand passed through empty air. Only her voice remained, soft and fading. "This is where it always ends." He turned, panic rising in his throat. "No." "Tomorrow," she whispered. "It's always tomorrow." The sound of rushing water filled his ears. He blinked, and he was outside. Rain. The dock beneath his feet slick with storm water. The lake stretching out before him, black and endless. He didn't know how he'd gotten there. He could see the cabin behind him, faint light flickering through the windows, as if the world itself were unraveling. At the end of the dock stood Claire. She was barefoot, her hair soaked, her white dress plastered against her skin. She turned slowly, and for the first time she smiled. "Do you remember now?" He took a step forward. "Claire, please." Lightning flashed, and for an instant he saw himself standing beside her. The other him, the one from before. His double turned, meeting his eyes with an expression of pure sorrow. And then both were gone. The dock shook beneath him as thunder cracked overhead. He dropped to his knees, gripping the edge of the wood, staring into the black water. His reflection rippled below. But it wasn't his face. It was Claire's. Her eyes opened, her lips moved. "Let go." The world fractured. Morning came quietly. The rain had stopped. Mist hung over the lake, soft and gray. A local fisherman found the cabin door ajar around sunrise. Inside, the air was still damp. The candle burned down to a puddle of wax. On the table, 5 wooden boxes arranged in a perfect line. Each contained a ring, each engraved with a name and a date. The last one, Michael Reed, October 17th. And beside it, carved into the wood of the table itself, faint but clear, it's over. Weeks later, the cabin was empty again. The lake calm, the air still. But sometimes, when the wind shifted, the locals swore they heard 2 voices, a man and a woman, laughing softly by the water's edge, their echoes blending with the ripples, fading with the rain. No one ever found the bodies. As the story fades into silence, the question lingers. What really happened? Did Michael and Claire become trapped in the loops of their guilt and memory, replaying the moment of their deaths again and again until acceptance freed them? Or was it something darker? The mind's last desperate trick to make sense of loss and regret? And if our memories can betray us, if love and guilt can blur the boundary between life and what comes after, then how do we ever know which version of our story is real? Do we ever stop repeating the things we can't forgive ourselves for? Or do we simply find new ways to relive them again and again until we finally let go?